Beginning live combat test 3. Hydraulics opened the doors in the test chamber, and a black bear wandered forth. It was one of the larger examples of its species, made even more intimidating by the fact that its fur bunched and bundled across its body, forming what looked, and acted like, a coating of nearly iron-hard spikes. This particular specimen had already awakened a power. Across from it, what looked like a large crustacean emerged from the opposite wall. The crab-like organism took one look at the bear and stopped moving, but whether it was attempting to avoid the bear, or play dead, its plan didn't work. The bear wasn't having it. The bear roared and charged, approaching the crustacean creature with all the fury of its 600-pound frame. The crustacean immediately sprung into motion, the top of its shell flipping forward like a car hood opening and hitting the bear in the face, causing it to stumble and huff in surprise more than pain. It wasn't surprised for long, and batted the shield of chitin to the side so hard the attaching tendons and muscle ripped, detaching it from the crustacean. But the crustacean was prepared. As the shield went flying, a swarm of needle-tipped tendrils whipped forward from the open top of the crab body and stabbed the bear in the eyes, blinding it. The bear went wild, raking its arms at its opponent in an attempt to dislodge the tendrils it could no longer see, but every time the tendrils withdrew as a paw came flying, and then stabbed forward to attack the bear's face once again. The bear panicked, and attempted to shuffle backwards, but now it was the crustacean that wasn't having it. It kept pace with the bear, keeping tendrils in contact with its face to pump a solution filled with nanites into the bear's ruined face, and it wasn't long before said nanites managed to reach and attack the brain of the bear, killing it quickly. Its spiky fur power hadn't even managed to come into play. Time: 57 seconds, said the scientist recording the test. The team went into motion, making sure that the data was recorded properly by the machines in their new setup. They'd all practiced with them before restarting the tests, but considering they had been working with an entirely different system of paper printouts and analog machines the first time around, their apprehensiveness about getting the data recordings right was an understandable concern. After all, animals with powers they could use as test subjects didn't grow on trees, or, well, if they did, the mad bio-tinker who must have made them wasn't sharing. The team nervously looked towards their leader, who sat hunched over a machine with lines of code rapidly scrolling across its screen. That did it. Good job everyone, said Brett Savvy. The team members let out muted cheers and congratulations, before turning back to their work. Brett took a brief moment to enjoy the atmosphere of a lab in full swing before doing likewise. It was only gone for a little while, but I missed this. He watched the lines of code scroll by on the screen, every now and then pausing the feed to rewind and take a closer look at what was happening. Before, if he wanted to do this he would have needed to dig his way through the printouts, as the digital code being called only displayed for an instant before the record was transferred to hard copy. The old method was one of several anti-technopath countermeasures, one meant to prevent a passing technopath from having access to a digital layout of the code. Brett had gotten rather good at reading the code on the first try as it flew by, but he still missed stuff, and often went digging through piles of printouts for hours. He was glad to not have to deal with that anymore. The new lab was remote enough and guarded enough to not need such measures. Which meant he now had the proper tools available to spot the obvious. He leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "Penny for your thoughts, Brett?" asked Dr. Mason, as he walked up behind Brett. He hadn't been in the lab when they were getting started. "Didn't we have that long discussion about live testing precautions, Dr. Mason?" responded Brett, ignoring Dr. Mason's question. "The one where we decided non-essential personnel shouldn't be around dangerous test subjects during odd summer." "OPSH, looks like the test is already over to me," said Dr. Mason, smiling. "Come now. This was the most successful test yet, and yet you look like someone stuck a finger in your petri dish. What's got you in knots?" Brett rolled his eyes at Dr. Mason's kind-hearted flippancy, but he supposed Dr. Mason was right. They were using already triggered animals for the test now for safety, and the new prototype, dubbed the Mark II, was working as expected. Which was sort of the problem. We managed to get the recording equipment properly calibrated with this test. I was able to follow the logic path just fine, but the thing is, all it really does is tell me what I already know from just watching the damn thing. The Mark II is showing the same level of proficiency as the original prototype was following the fight with the Grizzly, and I can't find any real difference between the kernel process recorded in our most recent backups and the new models. Somehow, the prototype's combat and pathfinding abilities advanced by a massive leap during that original fight, and I don't know why. Forget figuring out how it did what it did in the Trebla footage, I can't figure out how it got so good at stabbing bears. For all we know, this thing will go AWOL just like the Mark I did, so I'm thinking of putting a pause on all combat testing until we figure this out. Dr. Mason cringed. Then I suppose now is a bad time to tell you New Dawn's president is coming by for a tour. The lab went silent, wide-eyed technicians turning to Dr. Mason. What? New Dawn's president? He will be coming by later today. That's rather short notice. I'm inclined to believe that is on purpose. I tried to rush here after I got the call, but, old bones and all that, he smiled apologetically. Sorry I couldn't get here before you killed the bear. No, that's alright, we can just, Brett looked around the lab, taking in the scene. Frankly, the lab was a mess. They'd plunged back into live testing as fast as possible, under the assumption that odd summer might be crucial to worthwhile results, and they hadn't wanted to waste their window. Half of their equipment hadn't even been properly organized yet, haphazardly set up throughout the lab wherever they had space. Filing cabinets were pushed into one corner, half-finished coffee cups rested on tables, and their Mark II was nibbling on the dead bear in the background, probably ruining any results they could get off the corpse in the process. Screw it. Showtime then. Alright, you heard the man. We've got about 4 hours, supplied Dr. Mason. 2 hours to turn this into a respectable operation. We'll let the Mark II eat the bear, make sure its reserves are topped up. Then Dr. Janice, I want you to put it through its paces, critical thinking skills, obstacle course, the works. Make sure the upload of the backups took properly, but nothing that can break it. Let's assume he'll want to see a combat demonstration. Jacobson, Grentel, start up the clam. If we time it right, we might be able to show it to him in action, might as well give him the complete pitch. Everyone else, help me put this lab in order, and for God's sake throw your coffee cups away before they spill and fry something. The team scattered to their tasks, setting to them with a vigor that bordered on manic. This was their second chance after the disaster with the prototype, and they all knew that this tour could easily make or break the project permanently. They'd all had a brief taste of life without the lab, and none of them wanted to return to the cubicle hells, or endless job searches again. The best they could hope for right now was perhaps a teaching or tutoring position at a college, and the fight for those positions was tooth and nail this far into odd summer. No, this was the dream, and they'd be damned if they didn't grab it while they could. Brett himself helped with the clam, since his power was needed to start things up. Then he started moving equipment and cleaning the place up, since the need to monitor the Mark II's kernel process right now was not as pressing as showing a good front to their soon-to-be guest. Instead, he used the time doing physical work to zone out, and go over what needed doing in his head. He wasn't sure how the president would react to the project. He'd only ever seen the man in pictures or brief interviews in documentaries and the like. The man had built New Dawn Incorporated from the ground up over a decade ago, using the bolter as its flagship product, and the company was now on the bleeding edge of weapons technology. They should probably start with a demonstration of the Mark II, try and impress him with the actual combat results. Then try and sell him on the viability of the project as a commercial success to seal the deal. Hopefully the clam would be almost finished by the time he showed up. Beginning puzzle box test 1, called out Janice. Brett glanced over at the Mark II for a moment. The machine had reformed the top of its shell using the bare remains, and was now using its claws and 2 tendrils to maneuver the puzzle box, a square cube with various buttons and symbols on its surface. Idly he watched as it tried to figure out how to open the box, whereupon it would receive a nutrient pellet as positive reinforcement. Its two large claws slowly turned the puzzle box, allowing the Mark II to see which symbols lit up, and then push the corresponding buttons on the other sides of the cube. So simple a child could do it, but right now the critical thinking skills of a child was the Mark II's very best. It took 8 minutes before the AI figured out it needed to match both the colors and shapes of the symbols to the buttons, and then another minute to press them in the right order, whereupon Janice announced the time. Time. 9 minutes, 7 seconds. Well, at least that's working properly. Brett went back to wrestling the particularly heavy gizmo he'd picked to a better spot. They'd left it near the door due to its weight, but it really needed to be further along the wall so he wasn't constantly walking to it from his workstation. What was our record for the puzzle test? 5 minutes 20 seconds. But that was before we started randomizing the sequence better. It was a shame that the prototype hadn't taken to puzzles the way it had combat, but then, the mental jump from following base instincts to complex problem solving wasn't exactly an easy one. Brett and Dr. Mason were a molecular engineering major and a microbiologist respectively, so when they'd been forced to shift the project from nanites that stopped Mutavis to nanites that controlled an autonomous weapon, they had gone with what they knew. The nanite core system was modeled on living organisms, and that meant the instinct for base survival had to come way before the ability to recognize that a glowing blue circle meant you pressed the blue circular button, at least, if you wanted the nanite system to function as desired. Evolution had taken billions of years to get from simple molecular machines to complex problem-solving life, and yet they'd done so in less than 2 years. Thank you very much, so perhaps they could be forgiven for making a crab with the intellect of a dull 1-year-old. Beginning Puzzle Box Test 2. Kinda funny how all the prototypes become crustaceans though. What did Mason call it? Carcinogeneration? Brett snorted at the idle thought. Their method of training the prototypes had also modeled real organisms, which meant they'd needed to teach the machines to eat food and keep living, the basics of basics. The first nanite colonies had been placed in nutrient solution, and needed to be hard-coded by Brett to take in the right chemicals and keep the reaction going. Then he'd needed to hard-code the pathfinding when they placed the nanites next to the food, and not directly in it. Then he'd need to design a way for the nanites to remember useful structures, and for that it became apparent that the nanites needed a dedicated core, and etc. and etc. And then began live testing with cellular structures. Good lord, that had been a debacle. Up until that point the project was still Dr. Mason's anti-Mutavis garage project. Brett and the other members of the team were collected from different colleges, master's programs, wherever Dr. Mason could find them. Heck, the only other actual doctor on the team was Janice, an animal psychology and behavior analyst. Time. 7 minutes, 9 seconds. And we're damned lucky she gave us the time of day. She could be predicting fauna migration for the army and earning a pretty penny right now. They'd made steady progress on the nanites, even with working between classes and other real-life situations, but then the project stalled hard upon introducing the nanites to living cells. Even the most basic of single-celled organisms could contain thousands of interlocking mechanisms, and the nanites had taken forever to finally duplicate a single amoeba. That had been 3 whole weeks of painfully monitoring and guiding and husbanding the nanites to make sure the algorithms didn't just determine the process a waste and give up prematurely. But finally, they had a nanite colony that could mimic and replicate amoebas, and nothing else. Beginning Puzzle Box Test 3. He'd adjusted the next batch of nanites to give it more memory for recording cell types, but even that was too much for them. Sure, they could finally record complex structures like living cells, but they needed to learn each cell type from scratch, and actually understanding how bone, blood, muscle, and nerve cells all worked in concert. Forget about it. Brett could have spent the rest of his life adjusting the nanites and they would have never reached a complexity above mobile slime mold. Great if you wanted a living, slimy Roomba to patrol your apartment at the speed of drying paint, but if you wanted nanites that harmlessly interacted with a complex living being to root out Mutavis? Pfft. The project predictably stalled there. 6 months of amazing progress just to hit a brick wall. Time: 5 minutes, 13 seconds. Oh, but Dr. Mason had swooped in and saved the day there. Somehow he convinced New Dawn Incorporated that the project had merit as a weapons program, and right afterwards New Dawn had delivered the sample. That miraculous sample of mutant animal cells that made everything possible. These anomalous cells could shift from muscle cell, to nerve cell, to skin cell and more as commanded, like stem cells that never lost their charge, so the nanites only needed to learn a single one-size-fits-all design. Even better, and easily most crucial, was the fact that the cells taught each other. If one cell shifted, it could also transmit its changes to the next cell and the next. Suddenly Brett didn't need to guide the learning process for every new design, because the nanites would mimic the cells, and then the cells would teach the nanites, the learning process bouncing back and forth billions of times, trillions of times. Trillions of minute instances of trial and error learning, more than Brett could do by himself in 1,000 lifetimes, and the prototypes had advanced exponentially from there. Beginning Puzzle Box Test 4. Even the core signal concept was perfected from this advancement, providing a fast way to transmit commands from the core to the body, and receive feedback from the cells quickly. The fact that it reinforced the fail-safe at the same time was like a gift from the gods. Or perhaps not a gift, and more like Prometheus's stolen fire. Just like mankind took that flame and eventually used the sciences to disprove the Greek pantheon, Brett and his team would use the Mutavis-created cells to eventually eradicate Mutavis, hopefully. If he could get Benedicti to stop destroying his nanites for 2 seconds and let them do their job rooting out Mutavis' hiding spot. Ironic that humanity's best defense against Mutavis was now hindering their chance at a complete cure. He was so close. He just needed one last push. One last key to the puzzle. What was he missing? Tea time. 3 minutes, 4 seconds. Maybe the rogue prototype was that key. If only he had access to it. He hadn't heard back from Mr. Slick since. Wait. What was that? Asked Brett, his head snapping up from the console he was fiddling with. Most of the lab reacted similarly to Janice's pronouncement. 3 minutes, 4 seconds. I'm resetting it, it must be a fluke. Brett and the rest of the team watched as Janice reset the puzzle and started the next test. She was probably right, but what a fluke. 3 minutes was half of their best ever time. No need to get hopes up though, it could be anything, from a faulty timer, to the randomizer screwing up, or maybe even. Tea time. 1 minute, T2 seconds. Janice? One more time please, asked Dr. Mason. Already ahead of you. Starting test 6. The Mark II grabbed the puzzle box as the lights started up and damn near spun the thing like a basketball, for small eyes on stalk scanning the sides of the cube. It stopped the spin with one claw holding the first button in the sequence, then used 3 tendrils to rapidly press and hold the other 3 buttons in the lock combination. A panel on the bottom opening and a nutrient pellet fell into a waiting tendril. Time. 37 seconds. I don't believe it, starting test 7. The lab watched in spellbound silence as the Mark II spun the puzzle box again. It was a silent magician, performing a trick never before seen by human eyes. The lights flashed and suddenly, tada. Time 22 seconds. Starting test 8. The Mark II grabbed the box, spun it, and then froze. Its audience jerked at the sudden stop to the show, small gasps of surprise and worry escaping as if they had already been expecting the hammer to fall. But no, the Mark II was not dead, or broken, or stumped. All of its eyes were trained on a single side of the puzzle box. The reward panel. Slowly, one of its tendrils moved forward and tapped the panel, producing a dull ring. It waited a moment, then released one claw which it then smacked against the panel, nearly causing it to drop the cube from its one-clawed grip. Its eyes moved from the panel only briefly to take in the claw holding the cube. Then it set the contraption down on the floor, raised one claw up, and hammered it down onto the panel. Then again and again, until the panel warped and bent, and then the Mark II really went at it, using claws to crush, tendrils to pull, and even stabbing a needle-like foot into a small gap to lever the panel open in a flurry of force. With a final twist and snap of one claw, the offending panel went flying. Then it calmly picked the cube up, spun it once, and dumped the entire supply of nutrient pellets on the floor. Ta-da! The audience were stunned silent. Nobody moved, like they were afraid to do so would break the magic that had descended on the lab. It was Jacobson who finally couldn't take it anymore. "That did it. The recording," said Brett, practically diving for his console. Everyone else reacted similarly as Brett started sputtering orders. "Have it save state and download core memory. Then put it into sleep mode. No, wait. Standby mode, in case the solution is temp memory related. Ben, Sally, start monitoring the live kernel. Process. But keep your eyes on the damn thing. Someone sit and stare if that's what it takes. We can't afford it going rogue on us. Jacobson, Grentel, start going over the kernel process recording. Separate consoles, 10 minutes, I want your theories on when, why, and how its critical thinking skills started advancing. Everyone else, usual stations, start double-checking everything." Brett himself started going over the kernel memory at his own console, regretting they only had 5 of the gizmos they could use to watch the machine think. 5 had seemed like overkill at first, but now he wished he had a dozen. But, between himself, Jacobson, and Grentel they should be able to find what they were looking for. He kept scrolling back through the record. It was easy to see the acceleration, but where was the spark that set it off? He didn't see. "Hey Brett," called Ben, it started a large-scale memory wipe before the download request went through. "What timestamp?" Ben repeated it and Brett scrolled forward to the indicated time, but didn't see any wipe command logged in the record. "Are you sure it was a wipe?" "Absolutely, I saw it dump." "What? Where did it?" "But it was a huge section of memory." "How?" "I saw it." Now the technician was confused, and Brett wandered over to his console so the man could point out the exact time when he thought the wipe happened. "There's no wipe command logged here, but Ben wouldn't mistake any of these commands for a memory wipe. The hell is going on?" He looked down the list of commands issued by the core, and only saw what he expected to see when they requested a download of the core's memory. Admittedly there were lots of commands that the feed didn't display. For instance, a grow command issued by the core wouldn't display the thousands of individual smaller commands that described the organ it was growing, nor the trillions upon trillions of cell replication commands inside those. Trying to display all of those in a way a human could see and make sense of was a fool's errand, so Brett had long ago designed the core to group the commands and display them as a single action for ease of visibility. Was that a mistake? Did he need to go back and redesign it to display more? But then they would need to comb through a massive list of records. Even with the 1 or 2 people on the team who had a power that might help with that sort of thing, it would take too long. Brett checked the file for core memory now in their backups, but the file size of the core's memory state was also normal. It had grown a bit since their last check, but was still well within the estimated average, so what happened to all the data that was supposedly wiped? Ben was going bonkers while fretting over his console, certain that he had seen the Mark II's core wipe a large section of memory before providing the backup. "Here. Right here," said Ben finally, jabbing at his screen, "the timestamps. It issues a transfer, then does the cleanup, but the timestamps between the two are whole seconds apart. It transferred something big, then didn't record the wipe. Or, no wait, I think it grouped it into the cleanup command, the timestamp there is also a bit longer until the next command. So it transferred the data, deleted its copy, then hid the evidence in plain sight, which means it's actively hiding something from us. That means the entire record is, well, not useless, but suspect. Wipe and cleanup are similar enough that you could define them in the same action, but when did it redefine the parameters? How? Or who, offered Ben, it transferred data somewhere, and it wasn't to another spot in its memory. Maybe it really was a technomancer, stealing the data and hiding his tracks. We can't rule that out, but we're in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a shielded facility, protected by armed guards. If they were powerful enough to steal data at this range, they could have just taken what they wanted right off our new computers and there would be nothing we could do about it. No, the Mark II is hiding things for a reason, we just need to figure out what and why. The team pored over the code fast now that they had a better idea of what they were looking for. They started to find more odd instances like the hidden wipe command. Mislabeled temp variables, calls to functions that were then immediately cancelled, commands that were repeated multiple times but which never wound up doing anything, all things that weren't unexpected in dynamic code generated by an AI up until you realized that none of it was random. The others might have taken days to put it all together, but Brett had designed the lowest level of assembly himself, and had spent weeks, months going over the records of the prototype's highest level thoughts. He knew what it was thinking, how it was thinking, just not the why. Brett probably would have gotten it on his own eventually, but as luck would have it, he glanced up briefly, his eyes idly drawn to the Mark II. It was staring right back at him. He blinked, and the little eye on a stalk wasn't there anymore, all four of its simple eye stalks turned away to stare at the room as it idled in standby mode. It had glanced away like a child caught peeking. It's been watching us the entire time. The entire lab is visible to it and it's been transferring data somewhere. The way it's been modifying its code and hiding it from us is outside of its scope, but not if someone's been doing all the clever thinking for it. Occam's razor. Ben was right. Someone's been playing us the fool. Brett clenched his teeth at the bitterness he felt in that moment. All that progress, and it wasn't because of all the work they put into this project. It was because some asshole cowl had decided their project would be a good toy to play with. Likely Trebla, if that video he put out was anything to go by. Laughing in their faces. He took a deep breath to try and get a handle on himself before continuing, then stomped his way over to the viewing window. Janice? I need you to order the Mark II back to its pen. Then put it in biopsy mode and pop the core. Brett? Someone's been talking to our project. I'm putting an end to it. Janice gave him one worried look before interacting with her console and having the Mark II leave the test chamber for its pen. Brett started marching for the security door that would let him access the pen himself. Brett, said Dr. Mason, coming up behind him quickly, let's not do anything hasty. I'm not. Someone's been messing with the prototypes, and the most likely vector is the communications module. Everything we do here is pointless unless it's turned off, and I intend to make sure it's off. Alright, but are you sure it's wise to get so close to the Mark II when you're so sure it's been tampered with? That caused Brett to falter. He stopped and turned to the concerned Dr. Mason, who directed his gaze to the remains of the dead bear. There were a few scraps of fur, cartilage, and bone left, but not much else. The Mark II was quite thorough with its meal. Right. 15 minutes later, Brett entered the Mark II's pen with 6 guards armed with bolters, who took positions around the waiting Mark II, which was much larger up close, and then waved at Janice through the glass to trigger the biopsy. When she did, the Mark II shuddered and twitched, requiring Brett to calm the guards before they shot it. Internal and external changes were required to expose the core, and it wasn't always pretty. They didn't need a stray bolt taking out the core because it surprised them with a jump scare. He somewhat expected the Mark II to open the top of its shell again, and for the core to pop out like a bloody jack-in-the-box. Eventually the Mark II stopped twitching, and contrary to what Brett expected, the mouthparts opened wider, and then a large part of the internal structure emerged from within. The guards muttered expletives at the scene, and Brett was inclined to join them, because it wasn't the core that emerged. It was a human brain. Brett froze. Then blinked. Then turned to the lab window to see if the others saw what he saw. Many of his fellow scientists had their hands covering their mouths, or were making other varied expressions of surprise or horror, so they obviously understood the significance. Dr. Mason was already trying to restore order and heading for the pen himself. Someone should tell him not to. Who knows what this means? It's not supposed to make brains, the coarse signal should hinder secondary processing centers. Where did it even get a human brain? Did some poor fool enter the pen in it? No, it must be whoever messed with it, right? But that explains all the data transferred. All the hung calls to missing methods. And it used the brain to redefine the parameters. That's why it suddenly got so good with the puzzle box. It ate the whole bear and finally had the reserves for the algorithms to justify operating at full capacity. Stabbing a bear isn't nearly as resource-intensive for a brain as a puzzle. How smart is it now? Brett, don't do anything rash, yelled Dr. Mason, emerging from the security door with several other panicked team members and interrupting Brett's stupor. Oh, he had been reaching for the brain without realizing it. He put his arm down. No worries, Mason, I wasn't going to. I think we might still be in business actually. This brain, it explains everything. Almost everything. I'm just not quite sure where to go from here. Dr. Mason sighed in relief. Well, we'll figure it out together. After the initial shock ran its course, the team of scientists went back to work. Now that the mystery of the anomalous behavior was solved, several things needed to be determined. The biologists in their group were having a field day. So it's not a human brain? Asked a very relieved Brett. No, it just looks like it, scoffed Grentel. It's similar, but look here, the temporal lobe is quite atrophied, frontal lobe engorged, and look at these connections between the cerebellum and the surrounding structures. To decrease reaction time to stimulus perhaps, said Dr. Mason. The core has replaced most of the brain stem here, he pointed, it's become the central hub of the brain from the looks of it. That's how it's bypassed the secondary processing center limitation, said Sally, it just grew the brain around itself, like adding extra RAM to a computer. The brain isn't thinking, it's just enhancing the core's capabilities. We should have opened it up to look ages ago. This has so many applications for medical training. Admittedly there wasn't much point, said Grentel, besides the liver it's basically just a stomach with legs, or at least it was. Where did it get the design from though? It didn't eat some poor SOB, did it? Asked Brett. It might have copied and amalgamated all the animal brains it ate, suggested Dr. Mason. That's unlikely, hesitated Grentel. It's not a human brain now, but it looks like it might have started with one as the base. Damn it man, I asked if it was a human brain, said Brett. It isn't one. Semantics. Gentlemen. Who cares where it got a brain? Spilt milk at this point, said a new voice, and the scientists turned as one to the owner. The man it belonged to was quite out of place in the cement lab, with his immaculately trimmed full beard, long black hair streaked with silver and held in a stylish ponytail, and wearing what looked like a ridiculously comfortable maroon suit with matching golden cufflinks and watch, but they still recognized him from pictures. It was New Dawn Incorporated's president. He was flanked by several people, all in dark suits, and one of whom was Mr. Slick. The more important question is, does it still work? I'm no scientist, but last time I checked brains go on the inside. He laughed past an unlit cigar. Alec Rubin, your boss. Nice to finally meet you folks in the flesh. Dr. Mason, good to see you, and you would be Brett Savvy, correct? Don't mind my entourage, they're just here for show. Although I think you've met Mr. Slick, he gestured at the man over his right shoulder. Why yes. Brett Savvy, nice to meet you, he shook Alec's hand, which Brett imagined must feel much like shaking hands with the Mark II. The president emanated controlled strength, despite the slight paunch indicative of age and a healthy appetite. New Dawn's president introduced himself with a handshake to everyone there, despite the fact that some of them had been poking a brain not moments ago. Now then, on to business. Hopefully I didn't come too late in the day to get a tour. It looks like you all were about to start dinner here, he laughed, deep and jovial. And no, of course not. Please, right this way, said Dr. Mason. They all retreated back through the security door, and thankfully Dr. Mason took over speaking with Alec Rubin for a moment. Brett's nerves already felt close to shot for the day, and that was before he forgot about the demonstration they would be doing. The team swallowed their nerves, and went about setting up the Mark II, having it withdraw from biopsy mode. Luckily, it seemed their discovery of the brain hadn't caused anything bad to happen, and Brett hoped the Mark II wouldn't explode or otherwise before the tour ended. They set up a combat test, with a large praying mantis twice the size of a man as the opponent. Size was the most commonly triggered power among insects, and mantids in particular were a dangerous threat beyond the city walls. The Mark II bodied it. Literally. It bull-rushed the mantid into a wall, pinning it, then methodically tore the limbs off the mantid, using nanites to saw off its armored limbs. Not bad, nodded Alec, those things can usually take a few bolter rounds. Hope you don't mind, but I brought along something a bit spicier to test it with. Mr. Slick. Mr. Slick nodded and went to prep the Mark II's next opponent, while the scientist set up the test again, while conveniently forgetting to stop the Mark II from eating the mantis. 20 minutes later, 3 vampires entered the test area. Some of our boys picked these up earlier today. E12 was having a bit of a fire sale. Nasty things, and smarter than most people give them credit for. Let's see how it handles that. The vampires entered the room much more timidly than the mantis had, eyeing the Mark II with suspicion. The Mark II did the same, taking the time to analyze these never-before-seen opponents. One of the vampires fanned its wings creating a subsonic hum, and its 2 companions separated to flank the Mark II. It kept one eye stalk trained on each vampire, with the 4th flicking back and forth to whichever vampire hummed. It seemed unusually interested in the noise. One of the vampires leaped forward with a feint, swiping near the Mark II before rapidly backing off. The Mark II stepped back as well, training 2 eyes on the offender, but held its ground afterwards, making no offensive moves. Bit slow this time, is it tired or something? Asked Alec, gesturing with his unlit cigar. It's never fought a vampire before. It tends to try and analyze new opponents for as long as possible before diving in. Guess it does have a brain. Inside the test chamber, 2 of the vampires decided to try a real attack on the Mark II, and leapt from opposing sides to swipe their claws along the Mark II's shell, trying their claws against the material of the shell. Still, the Mark II didn't respond to the provocation, and Brett began to grow worried. Normally the prototypes all began fighting once their opponents did physical damage. He wished they'd been able to do more tests with it. This was the Mark II's 5th actual fight since they'd loaded the backups on it. The Mark II continued its possum act, and the vampires were getting bolder with the strikes, carving long, if superficial, scratches on the Mark II's shell. Finally, the Mark II shuddered, which Brett recognized as it having finished internal changes, and from its mouth emerged a long flat tendril. It inflated, revealing it was a tube, and then the Mark II did something really unexpected. It blew air through the tube, and produced a subsonic hum. The vampires all jumped back, reacting dramatically to the sound, and retreated to the far end of the room. The Mark II didn't follow, instead producing a series of different humming noises, slowly getting closer and closer to the vampire's own tones and frequencies. Soon, one of the vampires fanned its wings, and started to respond. "By God, is it trying to speak to them?" said Dr. Mason, in a hushed tone. Several of the members on the team were excitedly whispering to each other, mentioning the puzzle tests, and how the Mark II might be trying to decipher the vampire language. An amazing advancement if it were true, one that several members of the team were ecstatic about. But one person wasn't quite so exuberant, and he was the person they needed to impress. "The hell's it doing?" asked the president. I believe it's trying to talk to them, said Mr. Slick, at his side. Well, it's supposed to be killing them. Can we tell it to get a move on or something? We can, said Brett, but it won't be necessary. Please, patience. Alec Rubin raised an eyebrow at Brett, but shrugged and kept watching. The vampires were getting bolder inside the chamber, slowly approaching the Mark II while making their own communicative noises, to which the Mark II responded. Slowly the trio advanced to investigate this strange vampire that had a large shell and stood squat to the ground. The scientists were fascinated by the interplay, especially Janice, the animal psychology analyst. Vampires were known to be somewhat solitary hunters and killers, so seeing three of them work together like this, and for the Mark II to so easily decipher the language and attempt to talk back, was a fascinating event. The day had been filled with magical discoveries for the team. So it was somewhat a shame how brutally they were reminded exactly what it was they'd built. The vampires drew close to the Mark II, all four of them subsonically humming at each other. Then the first vampire drew close enough to try and smell the Mark II with its antennae, and the Mark II responded by extending two tendrils in a similar, but much more ill-intentioned display. When the vampire leaned in, the tendrils struck, wrapping around its throat and pulling it in close. Immediately the Mark II's large crab-like claws latched to the vampire's face and squeezed, popping its compound eyes. The vampires went berserk, the two other vampires attacking in a frenzy of clawed hands in an attempt to save the dying third. The Mark II didn't allow it, twisting its captive's neck to kill it fast, then opened the top of its shell to unleash its swarm of needle-tipped tendrils. Both attackers fended off the swarm of tendrils surprisingly well, using their four prehensile hands to grab clumps of tendrils behind the stabbing needle portion, and then extended their own needle-like proboscis into the Mark II, attempting to drain and weaken it quickly. Less than 5 seconds after their first gulps, the Mark II's blood self-destructed inside their gullets, and both vampires choked, convulsing in distress. The Mark II's tendrils then quickly wrapped around their hands and pulled them inside in a reversal, and finally the open lid of its shell swung down, crushing and trapping them like a massive Venus flytrap. They quickly died soon after, and Brett let out the breath he had been holding. Now that's what I'm talking about, said the president, his statement nearly echoing in the now silent lab. It goddamn tricked them and everything. Did you teach it to do that? No. Not as such, replied Dr. Mason, Brett. Could you? The Mark II is programmed with an objective hierarchy, part of which is to try new tactics when appropriate. It likely just determined that mimicking the vampires was worth attempting, as it had never encountered the behavior before, and it was low cost to attempt. It didn't know what the result of the mimicry would be, it only took advantage of the result. As programmed, for once. Even if it was rather original. Well, either way this looks like a winner to me. I'm impressed with how quickly you got all this up and running again, to think we almost cancelled it. That would be due to the extraneous costs involved, spoke one of the suits behind Alec, the first to speak up since they arrived. The cost to acquire the vampires it just killed, for example, was just under $200,000. With the cost of acquiring powered livestock, anti-technopath security measures, Tinker-made supplies and parts, and security and general staff for the facility, the overall total balloons towards just under $3 million, for the past 3 days. Oof, that is indeed quite the butcher's bill, guffawed Alec. Anything to say towards that? He asked Dr. Mason. Well, the scientific advancement alone is worth dash. It's cheap, interrupted Brett. The group of suits turned to him. He pointed to the Mark II. That right there represents about 300 pounds of nanotech-infused biomass, which translates to about 350 pounds of nutrient feed, or 500 pounds of whatever you can get your hands on. Which means the $200,000 vampires just got beat by about $800 worth of grocery store quality cane sugar. Then he pointed at the lab and team in general. This is all startup cost. We have some testing left to do, but the hardest parts are over. Now is when we move towards production, which is the second part of this tour. If you would all follow me. Alec Rubin grinned and nodded, and the group followed him out into the hall, and to another room. Inside the new room was mostly blank cement, but for a massive machine that dominated one wall. There was an opening and what looked a little like a water tank at one end, which then led to a spiraling series of large pipes and valves coiled into an almost snail shell-like mass, the entirety of which led to a simple, rectangular box. This is where we produce the cores that provide the anchor for the nanite swarms. We've taken to calling it the Carbon Lattice Applicator Machine, or CLAM for short. Seed molecules go into this tank here. He touched the water tank, and then pass through this series of pipes and coils. Each pass adds a coating of atoms to the original seed. Correctly bound molecules eventually pass to the next ring of coils, while failures are rigorously disposed of. Eventually, the result is deposited here. He touched the final box, unclicking a latch that allowed him to swing up the lid, and revealing 3 small, whitish cores. No two were exactly alike, but they were all mostly spherical, with several holes pocketing their surface, a small horn-like protrusion, and a single silverish filament extending from inside them. "Heh, these must be the pearls," chuckled Alec. "Basically yes. Any of these cores placed in or on suitable materials will begin to produce its own nanite swarm, and eventually grow its own body. We started the CLAM when we heard you were coming, which was about." He checked his watch, 6 hours ago. 2 hours per core. It varies. Because it relies on random chance for the molecules to coat properly, it tends to spit them out in odd clumps, but the average is around 10 cores per day. "That's not exactly mass production," said the suit from before. Brett smiled. "The solution to that is simple, just build more clams." "And how much would that cost?" "This particular machine represents about $20,000 in store-bought parts, $100,000 in raw materials provided by your company, and the combined efforts of 20 of the smartest people Dr. Mason could find, over the course of 2 years. Luckily you've already paid for that last one. That means you can make one of these machines for the price of a rather expensive car." "Yes, acquiring the test subjects is the main cost of the project." "Yes, the resources spent over the last 2 years is presumptuous. But most of those costs have already been paid, the math is done, and the most important point, the thing that makes this machine a viable product, is that it is not a tinker artifact. It uses actual logic in its design. When we started the project the goal was to not make something that would become defunct the moment its creator passed. Any team of engineers can put this design together with the blueprint, and any tinker with 2 brain cells to rub together can reproduce the specialized parts. Then what stops someone from stealing this device? Or just making it for themselves? The seed molecules required to start the process. Right now my molecular manipulation power is the only way to reproduce them in large enough quantities. Eventually someone will figure out the specific molecule needed, and perfect a method to reproduce them in large enough quantities without a power, but not before New Dawn Incorporated has a decade-long head start and a stranglehold on the market that starts, he slapped the machine, as soon as you make more of these. Brett could see the look of comprehension dawn on the group of businessmen, but Alec Rubin was already grinning halfway through his presentation. In that moment, he would have bet his degree that the New Dawn Incorporated president already decided how things would go long before ever restarting the project. Still, he grabbed Brett's hand in an iron grip, and shook it with all the vigor of someone who just listened to the world's best sales pitch. "Well, Mr. Savvy, you've convinced me." Then he addressed the man who had been voicing concerns. "What about you, Erickson? Still not convinced? You've already seen the failsafe specs. Any other complaints?" The man who had been questioning the costs gave a very put-upon sigh, eyed the president, Brett, the machine, and the other businessmen with dollar signs in their eyes, then asked, "Can you make it look less like a crab? Something more palatable to buyers, more like a robot perhaps?" Brett blinked, "Sure. In that case consider your team employed indefinitely," said Alec. "Here's hoping this project is a success, Mr. Savvy," he leaned in and winked, "because it'll be funding your next one." I look forward to your results on the Mutavis cure. Mr. Slick. I'll let you handle the details on this one. I'd like it all to go smoothly. Mr. Slick nodded. 20 minutes later, Alec Rubin and his entourage had moved on, and Brett was sitting in the lab again as his team cheered at the good news. Dr. Mason particularly was all smiles. That was quite the pitch, Brett, and you said you didn't like talking business. Just gotta speak their language, Dr. Mason. The team all chuckled at that. Well, this is another step, Brett. We're getting closer to Mutavis every day. It seems that way. Now we just gotta figure out how the Mark II got its hands on a brain. Did anyone manage to pull the data from it while I was giving them the pitch? Good news and bad news there, replied Grentel. Once we found the right query label, it let us pull the data it transferred to the brain. The problem is it's nothing. Just a large empty box filled with scraps of junk data. Damn. Maybe the backups. I already checked, answered Sally. The backups don't even have the junk data, just an empty section of memory. Whatever the prototype was hiding never hit our records. If I had to make a guess, hazarded Janice, the behavior the Mark II has been exhibiting is just junk data from the original prototype. It likely doesn't know why it's trying to hide that chunk of memory, only that the original had it labeled as a priority. That's why it didn't try to hide the puzzle test capabilities from us. Right, the Mark II's algorithms wouldn't have overwritten that particular behavior yet because it's had so much success with everything else it inherited from the prototype. Damn, so we still don't know what set off this advancement. Will that be a hindrance to advancing the project? Asked the voice of Mr. Slick. Half the team startled in surprise, having nearly forgotten the suited man in their midst. It's concerning, Mr. Slick, since it might happen again, and we don't know what effect it will have going forward. Has there been any progress with retrieving the prototype? Unfortunately, passivity hasn't paid off this time as I might have hoped. The local authorities haven't had much success acquiring the prototype, and it seems surprisingly adept at evading the local heroes. How is that possible? Asked Grentel. See for yourself. Mr. Slick pulled his phone from his pocket, which he really shouldn't have had with him in the lab, tapped it a few times, then showed it to the scientists, who gathered around. It showed a clip of the arrest of a masked individual by someone with a purple force field. And a large rock man. The audio was blanked out, but you could see them having some kind of discussion with the cowl or whoever it was, before the villain known as Warhead interrupted. The clip stopped there to the confusion of most the team, but not Brett and Dr. Mason. What was that? Asked Grentel in confusion. Why, that's your prototype, replied Mr. Slick. This footage was acquired only a few hours ago. I've been keeping tabs where possible. What are you talking about? That was just some supers. The one in the black, Grentel, said Brett. Remember the Trebla footage I showed you? The suits match. It can't be. That's impossible. They were speaking to it. The movements look completely different. But it does look similar. I don't see any injuries this time. How can we prove it without? There's no possible way. It's advancing too quickly. Please calm yourselves, said Mr. Slick, cutting through the exclamations like an icicle. Mr. Savvy. In your estimation, does this project need the prototype to continue? Brett stared at the little phone in silence for a moment. I think we could continue without it, Mr. Slick, but I also think it would be prudent to find out what is going on. In that, we are in agreement, Mr. Savvy, said Mr. Slick, while putting away his phone. I'll begin pushing forward on retrieving the prototype. From the look of things, it's had quite enough fun. But I wasn't finished. Ruby said it was all I could eat. Ahahaha. I don't see what is so funny, Pebbles. Aha. Tofu, you're the first person I've ever seen get cut off from the buffet and not the bar. They're set up to serve big hungry mutants like me, and you still made them flinch. Pebbles started laughing again. I wasn't sure how my being denied food was funny. I'd even offered to pay a second time, but apparently that wasn't enough. Well, I'm going to go then. Mikey had wisely left ages ago, and Zaps and Buzzer had both wandered off somewhere in the cyborg panda, and Ruby had needed to get back to work greeting guests. Oh, stop pouting and sit. Didn't I have a free lesson on social crap to teach you? Are you sure you are sober enough for that right now? Oh shush, I've barely had like 12. Man, you get snippy when you're hungry. He took a sip of beer. Now then. Here's everything you ever needed to know about social interaction. You ready for this? Got your pen and paper? I won't forget Pebbles. Good, 'cause all that crap they taught you, all the stuff you've pieced together since you crawled out of that hole, all the weird shit people do, it all boils down to one thing. Which is respect. He took another sip of beer. I don't understand. I thought respect was merely one of many factors. And all those factors boil down to respect. Here, pick any social event you've ever had, and I'll explain how it boils down to respect. Alright. Frankie from the Espada. Even after Sanguine basically abandoned him during our rescue of Jasper, he still went back to the Espada afterwards. I never understood why he did. Pfft, that's an easy one. Dipshit like Frankie can't get respect anywhere but the Espada. No one respects a loudmouth small-time purist a-hole who has to wave his power around like a baby rattle to get attention. Let me guess, he tried to stab you with it the first time you met him, right? Yes. Ha. Knew it. That's also why Sanguine abandoned him, you know. Didn't respect him enough to care. Come to think about it, I haven't heard much about either of them lately. Sanguine's pretty subtle, but Frankie can't keep his mouth closed to save his life. Maybe someone finally got pissed off enough to off him. Most likely. Alright, what about how Nicole can fight really well against rats and other animals, but can't fight against people? She respects the sanctity of human life. If she accidentally injured someone, she'd be infringing on their health and well-being, and she respects them too much to do that. What sanctity? Respect for something that a higher power says is worth respecting. A higher power? Like Hellion? Pfft, ahaha, he nearly choked on his beer. Yeah sure, but don't let her hear that. Her head's big enough as it is. So, when Mikey's grandma said to bring food when you are visiting someone's house, that is also respect. Oh definitely. What about ribbing? When you and Buzzer and Zaps insult each other. Simple, we respect each other enough to know that it's all in jest. What about when people who are mutants don't wear their armbands? That caused him to pause for a second. Because they think you aren't respecting their humanity. See Tofu, we people are social creatures. When the first group of cavemen fended off a saber-toothed tiger for the first time, it wasn't because they were stronger, or had weapons or what have you. It was because they all stood together, screaming with their fists raised, and the tiger turned and ran. Ever since, we've relied on each other, and that's why respect is important. Because if you don't have it, you get ousted from the group, like Frankie. He nodded, yes, and no one wants to be ousted from the group that is humanity. I understand. How do I get respect, Pebbles? Pfft, don't you even worry about that. You've earned it several times over since you put on that mask, not least of which when you dived into a vampire-filled sewer to rescue Buzzer with me. You're one of us, Tofu, no doubts about it. Oh, that's good. I think I'm going to start heading home, Pebbles. I have a lot to think about. Thanks for teaching me. Ha. No problem, I am a font of wisdom after all. Don't forget to tip the nice lady. Okay. Thank you for dancing for us, ma'am. I handed a $50 bill to the woman who had been dancing on our table since they cut me off from the buffet. Ah, thank you, hun. Any time. I left the cyborg panda and took a bus home, since Mikey took the van back hours ago. Pebbles' concept of respect was difficult to process, but it seemed correct. Everything humans did was in some way, shape, or form connected to their society, and their place in that society was determined at least partly by respect. The way Pebbles phrased it implied that it was a straightforward affair, but I was already making correlations to previous concepts I'd come across. Take kayfabe for instance. Wrestling matches seemed like a simple fight if you knew nothing about them, but if you watched one you would quickly come to realize that it is much more a performance than a straight-up fight. Because of this, they could designate large auditoriums, sell tickets, attract an audience much larger than the one who would only be interested in a straight fight, and even create careers and jobs and expand the human social system. All because everyone respected the lie of it. Without that, the entire system might collapse, and then no one would benefit. Neither the audience nor the performers. This went deeper than I had previously imagined. I would need to go back and start correlating previous events to the concept of respect, but maybe in the morning. I made it home without incident, stored my new souvenirs, watered my plant, made a sandwich, and then sent a few final messages to Nicole and Tim before crawling under my bed. It had been a long day. I woke up early, as normal, feeling mentally refreshed. Today I didn't have anything special planned, so after I went to Adder's morning training, and filed my report with Sandra for the latest incident, I was going to maybe do some cooking and let Nicole test it for me. Apparently my sense of taste was off in comparison to most humans, which made it difficult for me to judge whether or not my creations were a success. I filled out one of the spare reports, then headed for the door. Outside in the hallway though, I ran into a neighbor. It was the woman with brown scales, Natasha, as well as her two sons. She had them each by a hand, and seemed to be in some distress. "Hello Natasha, Ollie, Lucas," I nodded to the three of them. I'd become somewhat acquainted with them over the past weeks, since they lived on the same floor as me, and Natasha seemed friendly with Cindy. "Tofu. Hello. Hey, do you happen to know where Cindy is today?" "She didn't answer her door." "I'm sorry, I don't. She might be at morning training already. Would you like me to send her a message?" "I already did, but she didn't answer. I was going to ask if she could babysit for me, my normal sitter cancelled. Hey, do you think you could maybe watch them for a while? If you aren't busy." I'm really sorry to ask, I just have a really important interview I need to get to." "Interview? Don't you already have a job with Dash?" "Ah." She directed her eyes at her two kids, before leaning in to whisper, "They don't know about the business." "Ah. I'm just trying to find a new job that's a bit safer, you know. It shouldn't take more than an hour or two, it's just at 7 so I need to get going. Please. I just need someone to keep an eye on them in case they try to burn the place down." I suppose I can. Thank you. Seriously, thank you so much. Here's my key, you can just sit on the couch and watch T.V, they're always tired in the morning anyways. And my fridge is stocked, feel free to make yourself breakfast. Again, thank you so much. I'll be back soon." She eventually kissed her two sons goodbye, to their chagrin, and waved at them as she left on the elevator. I'd gone along with it since she'd said I could have breakfast, but strangely I was suddenly unsure of myself. Natasha obviously loved her sons, and now I needed to make sure they stayed safe. I hadn't had much interaction with children, although I'd talked a bit with Cindy about her babysitting. From her description, it didn't seem too hard. I turned to Ollie and Lucas. They stared up at me, apparently waiting for me to make the first move. "Want to watch some T.V? They both shook their heads, no. "Breakfast?" "We ate already," said Ollie. "Already," mirrored Lucas. "Do you play Gremlin Tamer?" "We don't have phones," said Ollie. "Phones," mirrored Lucas. "Ah. Want to see my knife collection?" "Nicole." Nicole woke up, feeling like something was off. At first, she thought it might be because she was sleeping cushioned by a bed. But after a bit of thinking, that wasn't it. Then she thought it might be the embarrassment of having run into the sewer yesterday, and she was somewhat still embarrassed about it, but that wasn't quite it either. She felt different. Physically. It took her a little while to realize what it was. She wasn't hungry. She blinked a bit. That can't be right. I'm not even close to full size yet. But as she checked herself over, it seemed to be true. Her regeneration had been working overtime since she'd been injured, and she'd been eating Rattleback's protein bars like they were popcorn. All of her essential limbs were back now. Head, claws, and all of her legs, it was just smaller than before. Right now she wouldn't fit on a regular-sized elevator, but one of HH's plus-size ones. Well, maybe. If she contorted herself, and used every inch of space. Maybe. Definitely not gonna test that just yet. She blushed. Her co-workers had already teased her for panicking during the drill, and if they knew she could fit on the emergency elevators anyways? That would be just too embarrassing. She flexed her limbs, and everything felt natural enough. Her legs felt just as limber as before, her claws were heavy and shield-like, but not the vault doors they had been before, and her vision was back to normal. Pfft, normal. But it was kinda true. Until her second head and eyes grew back, she had felt like she was half blind, and had constantly kept trying to unconsciously open eyes that weren't there. Perhaps she'd taken that vision for granted a bit. But, now everything was back to normal it seemed. Nicole smiled. And today I get to use the fabricator again. She got up and readied herself for work. Right now she was still using the room Tofu had dumped her in days ago, and she only had a few odds and ends she'd made herself using the fabricator, things like a hand mirror, that were small and easily carried away. But, if she wasn't growing anymore, maybe she'd be able to keep this room. Best to not get carried away though. It might have just slowed, not stopped. No sense getting my hopes up. Still, she was humming a tune as she left her room, walking backwards. She'd gotten into the habit since everyone had met her real face first, and perhaps because there had been a few accidents when she went around a corner the normal way. Hey there Nicole, you're up early. Nicole looked over to one of the tables in the common room, where Spikes was sprawled out, having slept in her seat from the looks of it. Good morning Spikes. I just thought I'd get a head start on the fabricator while no one's using it. I want to try a new circuit board design I saw in the book I'm reading. Ugh, it's too early in the morning for that kind of thing dear. Never could wrap my head around all that techno-babble stuff. Spikes leaned back and stretched, working out the kinks from sleeping in the chair. Ever since Nicole had come to the villain base, Spikes had taken it upon herself to introduce Nicole around the place and get her settled in, and Nicole had learned a lot about her and the others who worked as minions. For example, Spikes was actually married to Dillo, and both of them were actually 60 years old. You'd never guess it, because Spikes had the body of an athletic 30-year-old, a result of the high regeneration rate her mutation required to produce her spikes. They actually had a son, Hedge, who was older than Nicole. It seemed henching had become a family business with them, and Spike seemed determined to teach Nicole all the tricks of the trade, despite some of them being less than legal. Still, Spikes was like a combination of hippie, ride-or-die biker, and doting grandma all rolled into one, which made it strangely endearing even when she was explaining the finer points of kicking heroes in the balls and running for it. I'm just excited I guess. Socket said he was going to teach me how to put together a shortwave scrambler. Well, you have fun with that dear. Want a piece of nutrient bar? I managed to sneak one off of Rattleback. No thank you. I'm actually not hungry. I think my regeneration is finished. Oh that's wonderful. Glad to hear it. Swivel girl, let me get a good look at you. I should get going actually, said Nicole, suddenly overtaken by a bout of shyness, don't want to have to wait when Davy tries to load a whole wafer tray into the fabricator. Well alright, but if you don't learn to show off the goods how are you gonna impress the boys? Going by no. Spikes chuckled as Nicole scuttled out of the room before Spikes could tease her further. Spikes had been helping her get used to being around other people again, but she wasn't quite comfortable enough in her own skin just yet to even joke about such things. But still, progress. She had friends now, and a roof over her head, and an interesting job that she very much wanted to be the first one to this morning. Before someone else hogged her newest love in life, the Parcel Corp Deluxe MK3 Fabricator. It's going to be a good day. It's going to be one of those days. Get those legs up, you maggots. Warhead, or Uncle Bert as Cindy knew him, had made a surprise showing at the early training session, and had decided that Adder's stretches weren't enough of a warm-up for the unlucky people he'd caught there. Utterly unfair is what it was. This was supposed to be her zen time, where she put herself together for the day, not a forced march. Because of course Uncle Bert wakes up for morning practice. Thank God I didn't have breakfast yet. She was forced to run 20 laps as fast as she could around the large auditorium, and could only thank her lucky stars that she wasn't one of the people who couldn't even finish. Those people received such a loud earful from Warhead that Adder actually stepped in to mercifully save them. Something told Cindy that the training room would probably be rather scarce for the next few days, and maybe the base in general as well. Bah, if they don't know how to run they shouldn't have signed up, grumbled Warhead, as he walked up to Cindy. Hey there, Squirt. Glad to see you've been keeping up with it at least. Sorry about all the yellin', but I can't be playing favorites, you know. Cindy sighed. No worries, Uncle Bert, I get it. But you know we want to actually keep some of our employees, they aren't forced to be here. Bah, if they want to be paper pushers that's one thing, but if these mooks think they can wear a bonehead mask and not know how to run, they'd better get used to taking their licks. Where is everyone anyways? Don't tell me we've only got the 15 of these losers, he thumbed over his shoulder at the gasping group. We have over 100, Uncle Bert. This isn't the only training session of the day, and it's not like everyone comes in all at once or every day. TCH, things have been growing slack while I was gone. I'll have to whip these maggots into shape before I go back south. You aren't staying. Ah, I'll probably get nicked again at some point. Or they'll come begging me to go smash bugs one way or another. You know how it is. Not really. Anyways, Cin, what were you going by anyways? Ifrit. Ifrit? The hell's an Ifrit? A type of demon in ancient Islamic mythology. It's similar to a jinn, and has several different spellings depending on where you, Warhead was looking at her blankly, his face having gone slack. It's a fire spirit, Uncle Bert. Ha, always knew you'd be a smart one. Anyways, mind showing me where Socket is holed up? Need him to fix my helmet, got all scuffed up because of that stupid vampire. Cindy led Warhead to the garage, where it was unlikely that Socket would be up already, but maybe someone else would be there to help. They rounded the corner, and instantly Cindy spotted Nicole, who was over in her favorite corner of the garage. Hey, Nick Dash. Bug. Cindy, get back. Warhead suddenly grabbed Cindy's shoulder and threw her back. What? No. Uncle Bert, stop, she grabbed his arm, and almost had her arm wrenched from its socket as Warhead accelerated forward, smashing into a steel table that went careening at Nicole. Nicole screamed and lifted a claw to block the heavy object, but when it hit, it was with enough force that her clawed arm cracked in 3 places, not yet big enough or strong enough to take the hit. Luckily, it was deflected enough that it didn't smash into the rest of her, and instead went on to smash into one of the machines against the wall next to her. Warhead, stop, yelled Cindy, desperately running forward to catch him before he could further hurt her friend in a misunderstanding. Luckily he didn't make another move, nervously looking between a shivering Nicole, who he now realized was not just a bug, and at Cindy, who was yelling for him to stop. Bert. This is Nicole, my friend. She works here. Shit. I'm sorry, shit, reflexes. I didn't mean. Cindy grabbed his arm, not sure whether she was going to yell at him or hit him, but when she did, she realized that he was trembling. He wrenched his arm free, then took a deep breath and faced Nicole. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Army reflexes. You all right?" Nicole tried to say something, but she didn't seem able to get words out. "Sorry. Cindy, can you? I'll talk to Socket later. Need a damn drink." He turned and left in a hurry, which was probably for the best, but which left Cindy to clean up the mess he'd made. She turned to Nicole, who was nursing her bleeding claw. Cindy's eyes went wide at the extent of the injury, and she rushed up to Nicole. "I'm so sorry about him. He didn't mean anything by it, I promise." We should get that looked at." "'S fine." "It'll be fine," said Nicole. "It'll heal, I'm going to go have breakfast. I'm hungry. I'll come with you." "That's okay. I think I'd like to be alone for a while." Cindy watched as Nicole trudged away, heading for Rattleback's office instead of the cafeteria, which she would have needed to follow Warhead's path to get to. Shit. Just one of those days. Morph took a deep breath, and knocked on the door in front of him, no answer. After a few seconds, he knocked again, but there was still no response, or even any noise. That meant Turbo was likely still asleep. He fidgeted in indecision, his arms twitching as if he didn't know how to hold them while thinking. On one hand, waking up a tired hero, even one as abrasive as Turbo, felt rude to Morph. On the other hand, it was already 9:30, and their shift had technically started at 8. Eventually, it came down to the choice of which hero Morph wanted to deal with. Yeah, Turbo would probably be belligerent and perhaps cuss out Morph for waking him, but somehow that wasn't as intimidating as a possible lecture from Brick about asserting himself. Brick never yelled at Morph or Pina, nor did he get irrationally angry, but being lectured by him was like listening to an army drill sergeant trying to keep their cool while speaking to unruly high school students. No mean words were spoken, but the disappointment and mounting frustration were palpable. Maybe it was all in Morph's head, but still, talking to Brick was intimidating. So, hoping he wouldn't have to go ask Brick what to do next, Morph knocked on the door to Turbo's quarters once again. And one more time. And again, but a lot louder than he intended, because his power picked up on his frustration and turned his knuckles to stone just before he knocked. He got through 2 complete, rumbling taps before. "What? What is it? The hell are you making all this noise for?" said Turbo, leaning on the suddenly open door frame and rubbing his blurry eyes. He'd put on a blank mask to answer the door, basically just an extended domino mask with the Fortress City emblem, but was otherwise just in sleep shorts. Morph had to stop himself short from knocking on the man's bare chest. The man was lanky, with pale skin, and in shape. All evidence of how often he ran around in his full-body costume. The only other defining feature was the man's short, dark hair, which had a bleached blonde stripe running down the middle from front to back, somewhat reminiscent of the road-marked design of his costume. A bit tacky looking, in Morph's opinion, but Turbo pulled it off well enough. The women Turbo often brought to his room seemed to think so, at least. Morph gathered himself. "Well, I'm assigned to you for today's patrol, sir." "No you ain't," grunted Turbo, still picking sleep gunk out of his eyes. "It's my day off. Pina's with Brick, and you're with Magenta." Magenta is in the hospital, sir." Turbo paused, his brain catching up to the waking world. He gave Morph the stink eye. "Magenta. In the hospital?" "Yes sir. They say she might be out for a week or more, so we're taking her patrol area." "Christ. What did she do this time?" There was some sort of vampire monster thing." Morph awkwardly started jogging to the garage, his legs growing slightly longer and lengthening his stride as his power picked up on his urge for haste. Coming from anyone else, Turbo's comment might have been hypocritical, but there was every possibility that the speedster would be waiting in the garage for him when he arrived, and Turbo hated waiting. Morph, Pina, and a central support agent had driven around with Turbo all day yesterday, and Turbo had constantly been impatiently jumping from the moving vehicle to respond to incoming reports, often leaving the door swinging open on his way out. Technically, they were supposed to follow along and learn from Turbo how he handled these situations and maybe provide support if it was safe to do so, but there simply hadn't been time. Not with Brick and Magenta assisting with the lockdown, leaving Turbo as the only active hero for the entire E13 sector. It ended up with Morph and Pina awkwardly riding around in the van all day, only helping with taking statements or other non-violent, handler-approved tasks. It resulted in a lot of griping from Turbo, who muttered about Central babying them while he did all the work. Morph, unfortunately, had to agree. The sidekick's injuries during the Trebla robbery had spooked Morph's and Pina's central assigned handlers, and the two sidekicks had been assigned nothing but basic duties after being healed by a super with a medical-focused power. On the one hand, Morph was extremely glad they weren't just throwing him in the deep end during the middle of odd summer. On the other hand, Morph could practically feel the pressure weighing down on everyone around him. Cops and central agents were overworked, emergency resources were strained, and heroes were needed everywhere. The sudden lockdown in E12 had unleashed a flood of small incidents, from minor crooks taking advantage of the confusion, to normal civilians panicking due to the fear of whatever unknown disaster was happening right next door. Right now, things were holding together, but only because Turbo had been nearly everywhere at once, and E13's more notorious villains had declined to cause trouble during the, admittedly short, lockdown. But now it was the next day, and E13 was down another hero, leaving only Turbo and Brick in the middle of odd summer. Morph could count. Hellion, Imp, Socket, Warhead, already the list outnumbered the Capes 2-1, and he'd barely even started. That wasn't including the massive list of notable minions Hellion had in her employ, nor any of the other members of Hellion's old crew that might be tempted to stop by now that Warhead was around. Even worse, it wasn't like there weren't other cowls in E13 besides Hellion's henchmen who might cause trouble. Mechanalyzer, Snarl, the Vega family, people forgot about them with Hellion's henchmen always center stage. Morph sighed as he reached the garage, and Turbo was indeed leaning on the hood of an escort van, tapping his foot and grumbling under his breath. Seeing Morph, Turbo zoomed into the van, taking shotgun, and yelled out the window for Morph to hurry up. Morph got into the back seat, and the central agent who would be driving got them moving, pointedly and professionally ignoring the stream of invective slowly filtering out under Turbo's breath. Yep, one irate hero and his inexperienced sidekick were all that stood between E13's south side and the dozens of crooks and cowls that might decide today was the day they put their plans in motion. Who knew what they might be up to? Tofu. Why is all of your stuff on the floor? Asked Ollie. I have it organized for efficiency. That way I can reach everything easily. Even the knives. Especially the knives. They're the most important utensils. That's weird, mumbled Lucas. Is it? Yeah, agreed Ollie. Admittedly, I hadn't gotten around to properly furnishing my apartment yet, but I'd been to both Mikey's house and Nicole's room at the HH base, which had led me to believe that the floor of one's own personal space was a perfectly acceptable place to store items. Maybe it was weird because I organized everything by dimensions, use, and estimate of need. Perhaps disorganization was a requirement. What are those things? Asked Ollie. Metal slugs. I made them. And those? ID cards. And those? Teeth. Those are too big to be teeth. Not for a will-o-wisp. What is that? Asked Lucas, uncharacteristically loud. He was pointing towards my window. That's my plant. Cool, shouted Ollie, rushing over to the potted plant with Lucas in tow. They stopped short, to my relief. The plant had continued to remain immobile and benign, as advertised, but I didn't know how it might react to children. I didn't want them getting hurt if they somehow managed to provoke a volatile reaction. How'd you get a plant? Are you rich? Is that why you have so much weird stuff? What do you feed it? What's its name? We saw plants at the zoo, but they were plastic. Wait, is this one plastic? Can I touch it? Which question do you want me to answer first? What's its name? I haven't named it. You have to name pets. Ollie and Lucas set about determining what the best name for the plant should be, which apparently involved trying to yell their suggestions the loudest. Meanwhile, my phone rang, and I answered a call from Cindy. Hello Cindy. Hey Tofu, so I've got a little problem you might be able to help me with. What is it? Well, there was an incident at work, and long story short, I'm gonna need help cheering up Nicole. Was it Tedic? What? No. Actually it was Warhead. We were heading to the garage and I freaking forgot to tell him about Nicole. I should have realized. He's been fighting ants down in South America since forever, and just sort of reacted when he saw her. Accidentally broke her claw before I could stop him. He apologized, and Nicole said she's fine, but well. I see. I don't suppose you might have any ideas? I feel really bad about it. I could cook her some meatloaf. I don't really think that's going to cut it, Tofu. She seemed really down. I'll think about it then, but you should also call Mikey. He will likely have better ideas than me. Alright. Also, I got a text from Natasha saying she needed my help sitting the twins. If you're still at the apartments, can you let her know I'm going to take a while? She's not answering her phone. Oh, I talked to her already. I'm watching Ollie and Lucas right now. You are? Is everything going okay? Yes. I'm showing them my knife collection right now. Hey Tofu, asked Ollie, interrupting, is it okay if we pet your plant? Are the scales on? Your hands puncture-proof? I dunno. Then only touch the dull parts. K. Tofu. Was that Ollie? Tofu, what's going on over there? Asked Cindy. Just making sure the plant doesn't injure them. Some of the larger leaves can poke. An indicator popped up on my phone. Oh, and I'm getting another call from Mikey, that's convenient timing. I'll ask him about cheering up Nicole and get back to you. Talk to you later. Tofu Y dash. Beep. Hello Mikey. Hey Tofu. Is everything fine? You don't normally call so early. Hey, I get up early sometimes. Anyways, I was just calling to warn you to make sure you do the after-action paperwork for last night. Sandra seemed kinda pissed when I drove the van back alone, so maybe make sure you have it filled out before you see her. I have my report ready, but thank you for the warning. No worries. How about you, everything go fine after I left? Nothing dangerous happened at the club, however, would you happen to know the best way to cheer someone up? It seems there was an altercation at work this morning, and Nicole was injured. What? She okay? Her claw was injured, and Cindy says she seems depressed over the incident. Damn, she just can't seem to catch a break. The best way to cheer someone up is candy, yelled Ollie, suddenly. He'd been listening in. Hugs, supplied Lucas. The two of them began listing suggestions to cheer people up, the naming of the plant apparently forgotten. It seems children are easily distracted. Where are you, Tofu? I'm hearing a lot of yelling in the background. That's Ollie and Lucas. I'm watching them for my neighbor. You're babysitting? Yes. And everything's going fine? It seems to be. I've talked to Cindy about it. She normally sits for them. Oh, that's good then. Take her to the zoo, interrupted Ollie. The museum, said Lucas. They'd continued yelling suggestions throughout the phone call. Well anyways, we'll put our heads together and think of something for Nicole, continued Mikey, not having heard what the kids were saying. I'm not on shift today, but maybe I'll stop by and we can see how things go. Maybe we can all figure out something fun to do together. Could definitely do with something relaxing after all the stuff with the lockdown that went down yesterday. Indeed. We ended the call, and I turned back to the twins who were now arguing over whether the zoo or museum was better. Tofu. Tell Lucas the zoo is better, demanded Ollie. Nah. The museum is better, asserted Lucas. Which one is better, Tofu? They looked at me expectantly. I did a quick search on my phone for what those things were, and it was clear. I think the zoo is better. Ha! See? I told you so, yelled Ollie. Lucas frowned. Then, his lower lip quivered, and his eyes became watery. With a hiccup, he slowly started to wail, a shrill sound that emanated from him at an impressive volume. Are you injured? I asked, worried. I just told Mikey they were fine. Lucas didn't respond, continuing to cry. Ollie himself was wide-eyed, and became more and more anxious as Lucas continued to cry. He kept glancing between me and Lucas, as if expecting me to do something, but I was unsure what was the correct response for crying children. Ollie's own eyes soon grew watery as well, and it seemed he might start crying too, but then he threw his arms around Lucas and yelled, "I'm sorry." They both then cried for a little while, but eventually settled into sniffles and hiccups. Still, they did not at all seem happy about the situation, likely to break into a bout of crying again at any moment. Fascinating behavior. I had observed babies cry to alert their parents to physical distress, but I was certain that Lucas hadn't been physically harmed, so it must have been the answer I gave. It was surprising that merely saying something could produce such a completely distraught reaction, and indeed, a hug from Ollie helped to make Lucas feel better, like Lucas said they would. This was by far the most extreme emotional reaction I'd seen to words so far, and yet Ollie was able to calm Lucas rather quickly. Learning how to provoke and alleviate such reactions on demand would be highly beneficial, and with such clear-cut reactions, it seemed children could be a useful tool in testing human emotional stimuli. Lucas, might I ask what it was I said that made you sad? Why, you said the museum was bad. Ah, then there has been a misunderstanding. I did not mean to say that the museum was bad, just that of the two options I believe the zoo to be better. Both options are good, but after carefully considering the pros and cons, the zoo is slightly more valuable to me. Another person might find the museum more valuable, and I will indeed present both options to Nicole, as I believe both options would be of interest to her. I apologize for not clarifying. Okay. Lucas continued sniffling though, and Ollie continued to hold Lucas's hand while looking at the floor and frowning, obviously still feeling bad about his part in making Lucas cry. Despite both Ollie's and my own apology, and hugs, it seemed Lucas was still feeling sad. How to solve this without having to resort to hugs, myself? What else made children happy? Do you too like sugar? Morph. You have the right to your mask, and to the identity it represents. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can, and will, be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided. Newbie, we don't have time for the whole song and dance, interrupted Turbo. Just cuff M to an anchor and leave M for the cops to handle. Morph blinked at Turbo, who had suddenly appeared next to him in a blur. Morph's arms were currently made of concrete and wrapped like snakes around three would-be thieves he'd just caught. They'd cut through the metal shutters of a closed pawn shop window using some kind of metal absorption power one of the three had, before grabbing as many electronic items as possible and running for it. Morph cornered them after they ran down a dead-end alley and, despite the metal absorber having slightly enhanced strength, had been able to apprehend them without any injuries, or Turbo's intervention. Technically, his first solo collar. Right, replied Morph. He reached for the cuffs on his belt, but then paused as he realized a potential problem. Turbo? That guy absorbs metal, and the cuffs are metal, so, how do I? Ugh. Then we wait, replied Turbo, managing to make wait sound like a curse. Morph put cuffs on the two men who couldn't absorb metal, and they settled in to wait for a pickup. Luckily they were in an alley, so at least there weren't any rubberneckers, but having to stand around holding on to a criminal while Turbo paced was awkward to say the least. They never showed this part in the movies, at least, none that Morph ever watched. 5 minutes passed, then Turbo raised a hand to his comm, receiving a new communication from Central. He listened a few seconds before responding. Negative dispatch. Can't intercept. Currently running Overwatch on Sidekick, Morph, we have powered perps awaiting pickup. I think I can hold them here if you need to go, offered Morph. And have Brick rip me a new one for leaving you here unsupervised. Pass. 3 minutes went by before the next call came in for Turbo, which he again refused. Then 5 minutes before another came in. Finally, when a fourth call came in and was passed by, Morph nervously spoke up. Turbo, I can just, not tell Brick. If you need to go. That was a lot of calls. I'm sure I'll be fine. Turbo just tilted his head back and let out a long, exasperated sigh. Your helmet has a camera, right? Morph blinked, oh. Yeah. Then it looks like I'm stuck here. Word of advice, ditch that shit the moment they let you. Causes nothing but trouble. Oh. I guess Brick checks that, doesn't he? Not what I meant, but sure. Not what you meant. Turbo rolled his eyes, but said, we aren't stuck here because Brick has a pole up his ass. He does, but that's besides the point. We're stuck here because this asshole, he pointed at the man quietly sitting in Morph's clutches, can't be secured. Next time make sure that doesn't happen. Alright, how do I do that? Jesus, this isn't rocket science. Next time, when you're doing your best Roundup rodeo impression, just hit him harder. He can't run away if he can't run. Oh, isn't that kinda? TCH, it's a super fight, kid. Put them down before they put you down. You think Brick doesn't tenderize guys like these on a daily basis? I guess. But Magenta Dash crushed a dude in half on camera. Like I said, ditch them. As if anyone even gave a shit anyways. You know all that outrage was just Hellions people astroturfing, right? But what about Dash? Look. Stop asking stupid questions, and trust the guy with the highest arrests per minute ratio within 3 sectors. Ditch the cameras. Beat up the bad guys. Get paid. It's that simple. Turbo refused to say more, and they waited in silence until the cops finally came to take in the 3 men Morph apprehended, bringing with them a specialized containment unit complete with plastic cuffs, whereupon Turbo immediately ran off to deal with the calls still in progress. Morph got back in the escort van to slowly follow Turbo with the central agent, pondering the discussion with Turbo all the while. He supposed it made sense. Beating someone black and blue didn't seem like something you should do as a member of law enforcement, but when the guy you were trying to arrest could deadlift a truck, there were only so many ways you could apprehend them. Morph supposed that was why the training he'd been given put so much emphasis on avoiding use of excessive force after the arrest, but was conspicuously absent of reminders for proper conduct during the arrest. Logical sense. Still. He pulled out the work phone he was issued when he became a sidekick. Sidekicks didn't have access to the full Hero network, but the police network arrest records were open to him. After all, sidekicks needed to learn how their mentors did things, right? And what better way than to research the cases they'd worked on? Morph pulled up Turbo's records. The man hadn't been lying. Turbo's power allowed him to go through incidents at a rate most heroes could only dream of, and the records reflected it. It gave Morph an excellent sample size, even after he filtered out the arrests of normal citizens. That left him with the list of supers and mutants turbo arrested, and the results made Morph frown. While the normal citizen arrests were largely inconspicuous, the super and mutant arrests were spattered with injury reports. Especially the mutant arrests. But was it enough to be concerned? Pulling up Brick's and Magenta's records showed a similar ratio of injuries among arrests, maybe even a tad higher than Turbo's, but you didn't call in a speedster for situations that required a straight-up fight. You called them in where their speed could potentially end a fight before it started. From their power sets, one would assume Turbo's arrests would have a lower injury ratio than his teammates, but that wasn't the case. Add that to the fact Turbo had far more arrests total than Brick and Magenta combined, and it meant that while the ratio of arrests to injuries was similar for all three, Turbo had far more injuries logged total. Nearly 1 to 2 serious injuries for every 5 arrests of a super or mutant. Should he tell someone? Brick, maybe. But maybe he was way off base and those numbers were normal. He was just a fresh sidekick after all. It wasn't like someone else wouldn't have noticed, right? Causing discord over a rookie's misunderstanding would be a terrible idea, especially during odd summer while the team was so strained. Hell, even if Turbo was using excessive force during arrests, was that necessarily bad? Could you blame him for being heavy-handed on criminals when the sector was, quite literally in some cases, on fire? If Morph had been just a bit rougher during the fight, they might have been able to secure them at the scene and head to the calls that came in. Calls where people needed help. Hindsight was 20/20, he guessed. But Morph knew that wasn't really what Turbo meant. Tofu. Tofu, you're gonna miss it. This is the best part. That's alright. I still need to finish the second batch of waffles. As it turns out, the twins did indeed like sugar. We moved back to their house so I could make us something sweet to eat, and it turned out that Natasha owned an antique waffle iron. I'd been wanting to try one out, so I decided to make waffles, with syrup in every square, as the twins instructed. The twins happily ate their syrup and waffles while watching a television show called Ted the Tinker, in which a tinker was currently exploring space in his tinkered school bus while teaching a class of young humans. It was absolutely terrifying. Of all the things I had learned since escaping the lab, space was the absolute worst thing ever. The exact nature of the world outside the lab was far more sinister than I ever imagined, and I was in awe at the mental integrity with which the twins watched the cartoon. The show informed us that to travel between planets, you had to cross a massive void with absolutely nothing in it, for billions and trillions of miles in all directions. No materials, no resources, no nutrients, and if you somehow found yourself adrift in space without a method of propulsion, no amount of resource conservation would allow you to hibernate long enough to survive the millions and billions and trillions of years it might take you to drift towards a suitable planet. Assuming you drifted to a suitable planet, and didn't just smack into a sun, or get sucked into a black hole, or cooked by a solar flare, or any number of other terrible things that were completely unavoidable if you found yourself drifting in a vacuum. Wandergeist could be avoided, gods could be appeased, powerful supers could be killed, and Mikey's grandmother's ghost wouldn't actually kill you. But space? Inexorable death. Tofu, you're missing Saturn. Ugh. I suppressed the illogical urge to scrub my memories of the information, and resolved to package the knowledge from Ted the Tinker into storage as soon as the show was over. Knowledge of space was too important to delete, but I didn't want the information actively in my higher processes. For the next hour, I watched television and ate waffles with the twins, who alternated between staring at the television, eating, and rapidly rushing around the room while pretending to be superheroes that punched asteroids. It seemed that sugar agreed with them, as they seemed much more energetic and happy now. The physical and mental benefits of sugar couldn't be denied, which made it strange that many humans seemed to abstain from consuming adequate amounts. At least the twins had no such qualms, eating everything I gave them. Yet still, I might need to give them a little more, as they were wasting a lot of energy with unnecessary movements, flailing their arms and dashing about as they were. 18 years growth until legal recognition as a functional adult. Average estimate of odd summer events before adulthood, 5. Estimated probability of death before threshold reached, high. Conclusion, inefficient design. It was no wonder humans were so protective of their young. The growth period of the human life cycle was absurdly long, and human children seemed to have no real defenses against predation. With the amount of dangerous scenarios experienced during daily fortress city life, it seemed like a miracle that humans ever reached adulthood, though I suppose that was the reason parents provided for their young for the majority of this period. I doubted Ollie and Luke would be very successful minions, even with their fixation on the capes and cowls practice they seemed to enjoy. My list of research topics just keeps getting longer. Maybe that's why humans took so long to grow. From the samples I'd collected so far, their brains seemed to finish congealing around the 25 to 29-year age range. Perhaps that's how long it took for them to learn everything they might need to operate as fully functional humans. I was definitely having trouble keeping up with the abundance of topics I encountered on a day-to-day basis, even with constantly searching the internet on my phone. It was just so difficult to tell what I should be focusing on. Combat data and physical improvements were of course top priority, followed by things I needed for day-to-day survival and maintaining my disguise, but then things got tricky. How important was it to know Spanish, or Mandarin, when English was the dominant language in Fortress City by far? Which pop culture references were essential for me to know? Was memorizing Jesus's power set important if he was currently, but apparently only temporarily, dead? What about knowing the average price of whole grain wheat? Could I use the Fibonacci sequence to enhance combat predictions? Which was a more efficient use of my time, memorizing the numbers in an E13 phone book, or figuring out how to synthesize a Kobe beef substitute using a mix of bologna, human liver, and cheese whiz? All of these research topics and more had a place on my list, but it was difficult to decide which to focus on without a proper frame of reference. Sigh. Hopefully the schools wouldn't take too long to reopen after odd summer ended. Maybe Sandra could find me a spot somewhere. Until then, I suppose I could focus on. Click-clack. "I'm home," called Natasha, opening the front door. "Mom! Mom!" The twins went running for their mother, games forgotten, and immediately began blurting out a summary of everything we'd been doing. Tofu made waffles. He has a bunch of stuff on the floor. And we watched Neptune. Utilizils, and tooths, and metal bugs. And we played capes and cowls. Has a plant. And he has a plant. Oh my, seems you two had quite the exciting morning, but I bet it wasn't as exciting as mine. She paused for effect. I got the job. When odd summer ends I'll have a job at Bab's Beautific Boutique. No more long nights for me. I'll be able to tuck you two in every single night. She pinched their cheeks. The twins' reaction was, likely not what Natasha was hoping for. Their faces went blank, then showed confusion, then became distressed, before Ollie asked, "Does that mean, you won't be a superhero anymore?" Natasha blinked. "What?" "Ollie said Lucas, trying to shush Ollie. "What's this about?" asked Natasha, again. The twins looked at each other, then awkwardly faced their mother. "We found your hero mask," admitted Ollie. "Hero mask?" "The white one," said Lucas. "Oh. That mask. Please don't stop being a superhero," begged Ollie. "Ah. Ollie, honey, that mask, that's not a superhero mask." Both twins gasped. "You're a supervillain." "No. No Ollie, that mask, dash. Your mother doesn't wear that mask, Ollie." "Lucas," I interrupted. All three of them turned to me. "She got it from our warehouse job. There was an entire shipment of them that wasn't paid for, so we got to keep them." I pulled out my own mask. "See? Even I got one. Working in a warehouse is quite lucrative." I get to add lots of things to my collection. It took a little more cajoling, but eventually we convinced the twins that their mother and I really did just work in a warehouse. They then became pouty afterwards because their mother wasn't actually a superhero, but she just pulled them into a hug while mouthing "thank you" to me over their shoulders. You could still sign up to be a hero, pouted Ollie, to which Natasha laughed. Sorry hun, but even if they took mutants, I think I'm better suited for a desk job. I agreed. Her mutation was simply not as durable as most of the other powered minions, and if her priority was funneling earned resources into her offspring instead of herself, then a job with a safer risk/return was preferable. Being even a rank-and-file minion carried some physical risk, and being a bonehead could be quite dangerous if you didn't have the correct power set. Frankly, I wasn't sure why anyone would risk it without the ability to heal themselves or prevent injury. Humans could be far too fragile. Those that then chose to be supervillains and made themselves a target? Well, I had enough evidence to prove they were definitely crazy. The only thing more dangerous was being a superhero. I couldn't begin to imagine what went through their minds. Sidekicks. Stay here. Pina couldn't believe her ears. What? I can help. You aren't trained for this yet. Maintain a perimeter until the firefighters get here. But Dash. Stay here. Brick didn't waste another word, and marched right into the burning apartment building, flames licking uselessly at his sides. Pina stood where she was for a moment, fuming, before moving to do what Brick told her to. It incensed her that once again she was being relegated to busy work, but she would follow orders and get it done perfectly. Just like everything else she was assigned. Maybe then she would finally get to do something meaningful. She got to work, what little of it there was. The residents of the apartment building were already evacuated safely by the time she and Brick arrived at the scene, a combination of good architectural planning and the fire drill practice that most everyone in E13 had down pat. This was Hellion's stomping ground after all. 2 of the evacuees did need to be looked at for minor smoke inhalation, but the central agent that was babysitting Pina was already handling it. Instead, all she had to do was keep idiots and looky loose away from the building, which left her plenty of time to stew over her situation. Ever since the bank heist in E12, Pina was constantly being assigned the most menial of tasks, stuff that any central agent would be able to do. It was like everyone had forgotten Pina was trained for this. She'd signed up the very day she triggered her power, before Odd Summer was officially announced, and attended more than just Central's training courses, which were woefully incomplete in Pina's opinion. Police protocol. Memorized. Emergency procedures. Drilled. First aid. Self-defense. Pft. She'd taken courses in first aid well before she'd ever gotten her power, and attended a self-defense class since she was 13. Her fencing club. That was just exercise. One of many activities she excelled at. Even if it had been her favorite. Her demeanor soured further at the intrusive thought. Had been her favorite. The final match of the tournament where she gained her power had been her last match. Likely forever. They didn't allow you to compete in sports after you gained a power, nothing official anyway. Too many ways for someone to cheat even if their power technically didn't apply to the situation. That meant she was banned from any meaningful fencing tournament, an outcome that burned all the more as the win had gone to her opponent from another sector. The smug asshole scored the first hit and then. A.H. The sound of shattering glass preceded a scream, and Pina's head whipped around to the source. She caught just a glimpse of a body falling through the air before it impacted the pavement with a wet thud. The person had crashed out of a second-story window of the burning apartment. Pina was running to the body before most of the crowd could even gasp in shock, a can of multipurpose flame retardant pulled from her utility belt. Upon reaching the body, she liberally sprayed down the areas that were still aflame, then coated any patches of exposed skin she could see. Pina doubted the burn ointment properties of the spray would be up to the task though. The man was practically charcoal. Pina checked his pulse, found nothing, then risked turning him over in order to begin CPR. She flinched at the sight of his burned face, and was suddenly very grateful for the Tinker-made can of compressed air attached to her utility belt, as well as her helmet which blocked out most of the smell of burnt meat. She unfolded the plastic respirator mask attached to the can and placed it over the man's mouth and nose. It automatically adjusted a bit, before a green diode lit up letting her know she could proceed. She pumped air into his lungs with the can, and then compressed the man's chest, then repeated. And repeated. And repeated. It felt like an hour, but couldn't have been more than a minute before the man suddenly lurched, pulling in a strained breath of air on his own. Relief filled Pina. She'd practiced CPR many times, but never had to implement it in a real life-and-death situation before. With the man breathing again, Pina took a moment to recheck her surroundings. Reflexes had kicked in when she saw the man fall out of the building, but now she was wondering what exactly happened. Why was the man trapped in the building when everyone else had already evacuated? Was he related to the fire? Fortress City buildings didn't burn easily on their own. Was he a dumb criminal that got caught in his own arson attempt? Not likely. Brick hadn't appeared, which meant he was likely still dealing with whatever caused. The burned man suddenly grabbed her arm, and Pina nearly activated her power in surprise. She tried to tug her arm away, but his hand stubbornly clung to her, surprisingly strong. He gasped terribly, trying to say something. "Stop moving. You've been badly injured." It didn't seem like he could hear her, and she worried that he would hurt himself further if he didn't stop struggling. Where were the damn ambulances? "Sir. Sir, can you hear me? You need to stop moving, you might dash." The skin on the arm that gripped her sloughed off, and Pina nearly screamed, but she strangled her reaction into a gasp instead. Where she expected grisly bloody bits and bone, instead was only smooth skin with an oily orange sheen. Healthy skin, that she could see was still settling into place like hardening cement. Mutation. He was mutating. Pina paled beneath her mask, and felt the bile rise up in her throat, but she forced herself to remember her training and follow it. She'd known this was a possibility, and there were steps to follow in just this situation. Her free hand fumbled at her belt, her fingers feeling like jelly inside her gloves, but after a few tense moments managed to pull an emergency ration bar from its pouch. Hurriedly ripping the wrapper, she removed the respirator and held the bar up to the man's mouth, trying to tell the man to eat as she did so, and this time she did scream as his head whipped forward to snap at the nutrition bar, nearly taking her fingers with it. She flinched back as far as she could with his hand still gripping her arm like an iron manacle, and watched as a mouth now filled with razor-sharp teeth made short work of the bar. Over the next few minutes, Pina pulled more bars from her pouch and fed them to the man, not even bothering to remove the wrapper. Disgustingly, some of the razor-sharp teeth fell out even as he chewed and were swiftly replaced with flat teeth better suited to chewing the energy bars. It continued that way, the mutation making swift changes while he ate. Just as she began to worry that she would run out of food, the new mutant finally stopped eating, and his head fell back as he drifted into unconsciousness, no longer able to push past the pain and trauma of his ordeal. Pina ripped her arm away from the mutant's now limp hand and stood up, retreating a dozen steps to get to a safer distance. Sirens announced the arrival of the fire department, and a flash of anger crossed her thoughts. What the hell had taken them so long? Pina didn't wait for them, and instead marched for the escort van, ignoring the cowardly central agent that still wasn't approaching the mutant, ignoring the civilians that gawked with their cell phones out, and entered the van, slamming the door behind her. Pina sat and removed her helmet, then concentrated on slow, deep breaths. I will not throw up. She'd done her job perfectly. Unlike the agent. I will not throw up. Followed all of Brick's instructions. Dull as they were. I will not throw up. The crowd was safe, and the muta. I will not ulp. I will not through. She materialized a green needle, and stabbed it into her palm. The ghostly item pierced right through, doing no damage to her hand but igniting her pain receptors as if it had, causing the muscles to involuntarily spasm. Pina focused on that pain, distracting herself until her stomach settled. When it finally did, the needle winked out as if it never existed, leaving her hand without even a mark. She didn't throw up. She'd handled the job and contained the mutation perfectly. Nicole. Sewers in Fortress City were pretty nice, as far as sewers went. Lots of room to move around in. Relatively clean, at least in comparison to other mega cities. Plenty of monstrous fauna to eat if you were peckish, and lots of places to hide if you were one of those said fauna. Okay, so it was both metaphorically and literally a shithole. But that made it a perfect place to mope. Squee. Yes, yes, Mr. Chonkers. Here. Nicole broke off another piece of her nutrient bar and tossed it in the water. The large Nessie snapped it up before it even had time to soak, and made distressing gurgling noises as it swallowed the dry snack. Nicole would have been concerned if this hadn't been the upteenth time this had happened. Mr. Chonkers wasn't exactly a patient animal, finishing the hard swallow and then immediately nuzzling up to Nicole for more. While he was a couple tools short of a belt, Mr. Chonkers definitely knew how to be affectionate when he wanted food. Both he and the other Nessies were one of the many bright spots in Nicole's life as of late. So I really shouldn't be moping, or should I? I don't exactly have a balanced frame of reference. She'd been through a lot over the last few years. Most of it shitty, a fair portion of it terrifying, far too much of it life-threatening. Perhaps she could have avoided most of it, but only by allowing the powers that be to shut her away in an asylum where they wouldn't have to look at her. Compared to all that, what's a little cracked chitin? Right, Mr. Chonkers? Mr. Chonkers squeaked in mindless agreement, before suddenly turning to the entrance tunnel. The tendrils surrounding his mouth wriggled before he dunked his head just below the water and started blowing angry bubbles. Nicole knew what that meant. Sure enough, a few minutes later, a familiar figure entered the Nessie nest chamber. Tofu, wearing his normal everyday clothes, juxtaposed by his creepy doll helmet. He really seemed to like that thing. In his hand he had a plastic bag filled with containers, which she guessed to be whatever food was Tofu's newest obsession. Walking over, he gave Mr. Chonkers a light bonk when the Nessie lunged at him, before sitting down next to her. Hello Nicole. Did you get my text? I brought waffles for you to try. Thank you. And yes, I did. Did you see my reply? I must have missed it. Aha. Nicole rolled her eyes as Tofu pulled the containers of food out of the bag. Tofu miss a text? Sure. She'd sent him a reply saying she wasn't hungry and he needn't go out of his way, but as expected he'd gone dead silent afterwards. Obliviousness? More like weaponized obtuseness. Tofu was nothing if not stubborn when it came to food, treating the concept of not hungry like it was a particularly strange and intriguing alien to be studied. Make sure you pour syrup in every square, he cautioned, setting up the insulated containers. All right. The waffles were amazing. Made from scratch and kept fresh with Tinkerware containers, they were a far cry from the waffles in her memories. She'd only ever had the frozen kind, and those years ago, before she mutated. She ate with relish, and felt a bit guilty for claiming not to be hungry and then destroying nearly a dozen waffles. These were really good, Tofu. Thank you. I tried to copy the recipe from Maggie's Sunrise Diner. I think they came out well. The twins liked them too. The twins? I was babysitting my neighbor's twin children this morning. Babysitting? Did that go okay? No worries. Neither child was injured, and I reported the singular crying incident to their mother. Oh. Good. That's good. How about you? I heard you were injured at work. Yeah, there was a bit of an accident. It's not bad though, see? She maneuvered her claw around so he could get a clear look. It really wasn't as bad as it could have been. Just some large stress fractures near the elbow from blocking the table. Rattleback had helped put some antiseptic putty on to seal the injury, but, truthfully, it probably wasn't necessary. The crack scabbed up well even without the putty, and she could still support her claw, even if it was sore and she couldn't move it too fast. How did this happen? Oh, it was nothing. Just spooked a guy into having war flashbacks. You know me, always going around scaring people. Nicole, you would not intentionally scare someone. Are you okay? What? Yeah, I'm fine, Tofu. It was just an accident. It'll heal fast. That's good. But I mean, how are you feeling emotionally? I'm fine, Tofu. Really? It was just a mistake, he already apologized and everything. It is my experience that mistakes can hurt feelings even if you explain and apologize. Did the waffles make you feel any better? They did, Tofu. Really, I'm fine. Everything's glimmer bolts. Honest. Would you like a hug? That got a small snort and smile out of her. Tofu, you hate hugs. Yes, but hugs seem to help people who are feeling sad. She paused, then sighed while giving her ponytail a tug. I mean, if you're offering. It was a shame Tofu didn't like hugs. He was really good at them. Creepy doll mask or not? Better? Asked Tofu. A lot better. Thank you. Good. Now then, I wanted to ask Dash. The roar echoed down the sewer tunnels, drowning out Tofu and silencing the Nessies. Even the water seemed to drip more quietly, afterwards. I guess Socket found out about the fabricator, squeaked Nicole. Indeed. I'm surprised we could hear him from this distance. Isn't the base insulated to prevent echoes? Yep. You know, I find I'm still hungry. Would you care to go hunting? Another crash echoed down the tunnels, sounding suspiciously like a wrench impacting cement. Somewhere far from the base. Tofu clarified. Sounds like a plan. A great plan, even. The best. They packed up the tinkerware and made ready to leave. Also, said Tofu, as they walked away. I wanted to ask, do you prefer museums, or zoos? For some reason, a shiver went down her spine. Nicole and I made it back to base after a short hunt in the sewers. We weren't very successful, likely because the Nessies had claimed the area in a several-mile radius and scraped the walls clean. Still, walking and talking seemed to cheer Nicole up, enough so that she wasn't completely adverse to what Mikey and Cindy had in store. We were going on an outing. I don't know about this, guys. It'll be fine, Nicole. We won't go anywhere you aren't comfortable with, replied Cindy. I could tell she was quite confident in her plan, as she'd already changed her voice using her inhaler in preparation. Still, wasn't there that lockdown? Wouldn't it be safer to stay in for a while? I think we'll be fine, said Mikey. The super vampire is dead, and Tofu handled the smaller ones fine. Oh, I'd heard about that from. Wait, you were there? Yeah, we were in E12 for a job yesterday and got caught up in it. Didn't you tell her, Tofu? While you were out, hunting, he said, turning to me. He didn't, said Nicole, giving me an exasperated look. We talked about waffle irons and brunch history the entire time. I shrugged, to which everyone rolled their eyes. Anyways, continued Cindy, that's exactly why now is the perfect time to go out if we don't want to run into a lot of people. No one's going to want to be out after sundown when there was a lockdown caused by vampires. I guess, okay, let's do it. Woo, whooped Mikey, pumping his hand in the air. Finally get to use my license for something that isn't a getaway. We headed for the garage, where Cindy and Mikey had reserved a large van ahead of time. It took a bit of finagling, but Nicole managed to fit into the rear compartment. It was a good thing we were doing this now, as Nicole probably wouldn't fit with another few days of growth. If I couldn't shift my own organs around, it might have been very uncomfortable sitting beside her. "Are you sure you're alright sitting like that, Tofu?" asked Nicole. "You look a bit, cramped." "I'm fine, Nicole." "So, where are we headed anyways?" asked Mikey. "Did you hash anything out with Tofu?" "Oh, I'm okay with anywhere, except the zoo." "Sorry, Tofu, I'd rather not go there." "The zoo?" questioned Mikey. He and Cindy both turned questioning looks towards me. "Lucas recommended it." "Tofu, Lucas is a little kid," said Cindy. "Of course he'd want to go to the zoo." "Dude, trust me. Even for E13 that zoo is a complete junk pile," said Mikey. "The animatronics barely worked even back when I was a kid, and I doubt they've fixed them up since." "Animatronics? Like the robots and stuff?" "Robots? Tofu, they don't have real animals at the zoo. It's all machines and holograms and stuff that are supposed to look like the animals." "But the website said." "It's just advertising, dude. They do that to get the, kids excited." "Oh. The internet lied to me." Cough. "Well, how about we just get on the road and decide from there?" Mikey said, as he started the van. "Maybe you can go there later, Tofu," offered Nicole. "That's okay, there isn't any value in observing fake animals." It's not that bad. There are better zoos in other sectors if you really want to see them." "There are. With animals. Would you want to go to one of those instead?" No real animals. Even if there were, I'm afraid my time at Tartarus kinda soured me on the concept of animals in cages." "They sent you to Tartarus," interjected Cindy. "What's Tartarus?" I asked. "It's a detention center where they lock up Category 4 mutants." "I can't believe they'd send you there, Nicole." "It was the only place I could go to get the resources I needed after my mutation. I didn't really have anywhere else to go," Nicole shrugged. Then she frowned. "Although, they definitely didn't seem too keen on letting me leave. I checked myself out after one of the, permanent residents caused a commotion." "Those assholes," spat Cindy. "Tartarus added to priority list. I might need to pay a visit there later." It definitely sounded interesting. More than the fake robot zoo at least. Mikey drove the van towards the garage exit ramp while Cindy and Nicole discussed alternate places to go. But, before we could leave, a figure in a mask I didn't recognize came out of the stairwell and ran towards us, waving their arms frantically and nearly tripping over several pieces of equipment. "Oh no," muttered Cindy. Hold up for a sec, Mikey. That's Murphy, one of Hellion's acquaintances. We should see what she has to say." Mikey halted the van, and Murphy nearly collapsed as she reached the side window. She was a thin human in a tracksuit, and she wore a strange white mask that mimicked a person's face. It was inscribed with mathematical formulas. To my surprise, I was able to recognize and understand all of the represented math. Normally, when I looked at higher-level mathematics there was always an included formula or two that threw a logic error. Not this time. Deep breaths. "Murphy, we'll wait. Is something bad going to happen?" "I haven't seen you in months," said Cindy. "Not how it works," gasped Murphy. Slowly, her fitful breathing subsided, although it seemed her head was troubling her quite a bit. She kept moving her mask to clutch at her temple. "Woo, thought I wasn't going to be able to catch you," said Murphy. She pulled her mask properly into place, and stood up straight. "Now then, my name is Murphy, owner and operator of the Red Dragon Casino and subsidiaries. And you must be Cindy's friends. Mention her for a 5% discount on your first chip exchange over 10K. So, you all were headed out somewhere?" "Oh no. Is something bad really going to happen?" asked Cindy. "Nice to see you too," responded Murphy, flicking Cindy's forehead. And no. I was doing some work for Hellion yesterday and was in the area, so I thought I'd offer my services to any interested parties. Oh. Thanks, I guess, but doesn't that usually cost a lot? Asked Cindy, rubbing her forehead with a slight frown. Usually, but this one's a cheapo. Excuse me, but what exactly are we talking about? Asked Mikey. Murphy can sense and control luck, answered Cindy. Oh please, Cindy, you make it sound so banal. We're talking about the karmic scales, the grand roulette, the universal math, happenstance and divine providence, and if you want, I can be your guide down the path to the biggest payout, responded Murphy, sweeping her arms in grand gestures and ending with a pose. I wondered if she and Trebla knew each other. You pay money for luck, Murphy, Cindy deadpanned. You used to run around my casino in your underwear. Hey. No, I was only 2 years old, said Cindy, her ears turning red as she threw glances at us. Anyways. Theatrics aside, I noticed you all heading out to cause teenage trouble right after the next sector over had a small vampire apocalypse and thought, hey, why not make sure Cindy's mom doesn't have a heart attack? Real cheap too, a bargain barrel price. Cindy narrowed her eyes at Murphy. Okay, and how much would that be? Say, oh I dunno, about 10K. What? Per person. Oh, come on. We were just gonna get some food and go to a drive-through movie or something. Was it going to go that badly? How would I know? I don't see the future, Cindy, but I do see odds, and a van full of people of interest to law enforcement tends to stack them against you. Heck, this guy here still has his minion helmet on, she said, pointing at me. I was going to take it off. Murphy tilted her head at Cindy. Ugh, fine. We'll pay it. Cindy, I don't have that kind of money, said Nicole. I'll cover you guys, don't worry. What? I can't ask you for that. I'm with Nicole, that's way too much, replied Mikey. How about 100,000 per person, Murphy? I asked. The conversation abruptly halted, and everyone turned their heads to me. What? It stands to reason that if we can buy luck, we should buy as much as possible. I can cover it. Oh ho, it seems we have a big spender here, said Murphy, rubbing her hands together. 100,000. Muttered Mikey. Tofu, you can't, protested Nicole. Tofu, how do you even have that much money? Asked Cindy. Hazard pay. And Hellion had a bounty on the rat stitcher. I've been stockpiling what I earn. Tofu, that's way too much just for this, said Nicole, while pulling on her ponytail. Is it? Like Murphy said, most of us are wanted by the authorities, and they will likely be on alert after the lockdown. If using money can guarantee a safe outing, then it seems worthwhile. But 400,000? All right everyone, quiet down, you're aggravating my headache, said Murphy. She tapped her finger against the lips of her mask. I can see that money is an issue, so how about a little trade instead? I've got a little job that requires a professional touch, and you happen to be professionally employed. How about you help me out, and it'll be worth the price of making sure your little joyride goes well. Deal? We exchanged glances before Cindy turned back to Murphy. Saying it is, what do you want us to do? The first thing Murphy wanted us to do was drive her to a pharmacy to pick up more pain relief medicine for her headache. The second thing? Well, it seemed we would be going to the museum today. You want us to rob a museum? Asked Nicole, incredulously. Not rob. Burglarize, clarified Murphy. That's hardly better. What's it matter? You're a minion. It's just some light theft. I'm a mechanic. I wasn't hired for this. You work for HH, I'm sure some of it has rubbed off on you. You'll be Finn. It'll be like riding a bicycle. Nicole glared, and waved a hand at her legs. All 24 of them. Cough, right. Well, regardless, without you the odds of this going off without a hitch drop dramatically. Sure you want to let your friends go without you? Murphy. Don't guilt trip her, said Cindy. Nicole didn't sign up for minion work. If she doesn't feel comfortable, she doesn't have to go. I'll go. Nicole, you really don't have to. We can handle this. It's fine. I just need to turn off the alarms, right? I've got one of Socket's kits, so it should be simple enough. That's the spirit, said Murphy, and don't forget your mask. She held out a black domino mask to Nicole. You're joking. Them's the rules. Ugh. Fine. Nicole snatched the mask from Murphy, then began the careful task of extricating herself from the van. With Murphy riding along, it had been a very tight fit. Myself, I started unloading the rest of Nicole's disguise from the supplies we'd brought with us. Nicole's hesitance about this endeavor was understandable, as she had been mistaken for a category for mutation multiple times in the past, and humans tended to respond unpredictably when confronted with the more drastic mutations. An encounter with law enforcement, or worse, private citizens with illegal firearms, could go badly. To that end, I'd procured some additional deterrent to avoid mix-ups. Namely, 28 armbands for Nicole to wear. 4 for her arms and claws, and 24 for each of her legs. I feel ridiculous. I think it looks fine, but more importantly it is safer. No one will be able to claim ignorance in the event of an altercation this way. Have you thought of a code name? I think I'll be fine as Nicole. Hey, that means you can join the real name club with me and Tofu, joked Mikey. He extended his fist for a bump, to which Nicole gave a half-hearted smirk and returned the fist bump. Then Mikey turned to Cindy. Speaking of which, did you want us to call you Ifrit, or did you have something else since you're wearing a domino mask? What? Well, did you want us to use your real name too, or? Oh. Shit. Were you trying to keep that under wraps? I thought Tofu and Nicole already knew, Cindy shook her head. No, they already knew. I wasn't really trying to hide it. It's just good policy to try and keep work and home life separate, you know. Mikey let out a sigh of relief. I get that. So. I guess for today I'm joining the real name club, Cindy said, with a grin. Right on. Hey. Loyal minions, called Murphy from the van. Get a move on, nighttime's burning. Cindy rolled her eyes, but all of us finished up grabbing our equipment for tonight and started heading across the parking lot to the museum. Anyone else feel like maybe we were bamboozled, said Mikey. Yeah, that's definitely a possibility, said Cindy with a sigh, but Murphy, she tends to see important things. She once called my mom to tell her to throw a box of donuts out the window. It turned out the donuts had been laced with C4 by an HH competitor, and then they landed on Candor, who happened to be patrolling outside. The heroes wound up going after that guy over the incident. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if her entire offer was all a ruse to get us out here. Oof, office life in the supervillain sector, am I right? Right. Anyways, I think that's the administration building over there. Mikey pointed across the parking lot, and we headed towards the building. We made our way around to the administration building, which was more like an offshoot of the main gallery which linked it to the intake hub. It hadn't been made with the same aesthetic in mind, being squat and concrete gray. The windows were high up the sides and too small for a human to enter, even not factoring in the bars. The lights were off, and the building seemed empty. Nicole approached the door with some trepidation, clutching the bag of tools to her chest and looking back and forth across the parking lot. Several times she glanced straight up at the sky and quickly turned away again. I sympathized. The sky was unpleasant to look at. So much empty space was unnerving. Woo, haven't been out in a while, muttered Nicole. Upon reaching the door, she pulled open her pack. So I just open it? Anything I should know? It might have a silent alarm, replied Cindy. We'll keep watch, so take your time. Nicole pulled various tools from the bag, fiddling with and double-checking each before taking a deep breath and getting to work. She used only 2 of the tools before the door lock clicked, surprising her. It's already open. And I think I got the silent alarm. That seemed too easy, said Nicole. If you got the silent, then that's probably it. E13's museum is, yeah. I think people stopped robbing it decades ago. They don't even accept cash for admission, they only take chits and cards now. That explains the lack of guards, I mentioned. The small parking lot had been completely empty, and the grounds looked deserted. No point in guards if the only thing they'll do is get hurt. We just need to wipe the cameras. We all headed into the offices, Nicole being especially careful not to bump her legs into desks and trash bins. We walked through the front area, which held a few desks, stacks of paper, a few desktop computers which Nicole declared to be ancient, and a lone wireless security camera with its red light blinking. Nicole pulled a device from her pack and used it to trace where the camera was sending its footage. We followed the signal into the back area. The back area wasn't any more interesting, composed mainly of filing cabinets and several neglected office desks covered in stacks of forms and old takeout boxes. I helped Nicole move a cabinet that was sitting in front of a closet door with power warnings pasted to it. Inside was the fuse box for the building and a few metal boxes with wires leading into the walls. Nicole popped the lids on some of them open, and after fiddling with them a bit declared, the recording isn't stored here. It looks like someone jury-rigged it to send it through a landline to somewhere else. Blah, it's probably in another building. Make sure your masks are secure in case we can't find it. That doesn't really help me, squeaked Nicole as she nevertheless fussed with her mask to make sure it was secure. I'm sure we'll find it, Nicole. They probably just changed it after the, last time something like this happened, Cindy finished sheepishly. We'll check other cameras while we get what Murphy wanted. We made our way to the intake hub through a corridor that connected them to the offices. The door separating the 2 buildings wasn't alarmed, though Nicole double-checked it anyway. Inside, the intake hub was composed of several rooms attached to a central hallway, reminding me a bit of a school, or the lab I was made in, except that there was also a large garage attached to the end of the hall. Most of the building looked like it was being used as storage for various displays. Alright, first on the list is, anything valuable from Tinker Nummum. The lucky number is 347 foot. Real specific there, Murphy. Okay, probably best to see if we can find an inventory somewhere, said Cindy, eyeing the displays and random objects that were piled in the hallway itself. It seemed the museum had a large backlog. It took a while, but we eventually managed to find the desk where someone did inventory, placed randomly in one of the rooms. It was all in physical paper logs, which took some deciphering before we could understand them. Whoever worked here had some really sloppy handwriting. I managed to speed things up by flipping quickly through the manifests until I detected the number 347. Here. It says that some personal effects were part of an intake that was placed in room 5, intake 347. It hasn't been sorted yet. Good enough place to start as any. We found the corresponding room, and we went to work looking through the piles of crates for the one labeled with the correct intake number. Most of the crates were in order, but there were some large gaps and mix-ups in the numbering scheme. The box we were looking for wound up being at the back of the room, behind a large cardboard cutout of a hero giving a speech. The speech bubble was ripped in half, and Mikey only noticed the box behind it because he was trying to make out the missing words. Ha! That was lucky, said Mikey. I think it might have been a joke, but it only got an eye roll and smirk from Cindy. Nicole was too nervous to react beyond being interested in the box. Hopefully I could find something to make this outing enjoyable for her. Minions usually bantered and had some fun on small jobs like this. Oof, tough crowd. Well, let's see what we got. The small crate was nailed shut, so I pried the top off carefully. Inside were various objects, some I didn't recognize and some I did. Okay, so we have a pair of fuzzy dice, some very old, used train tickets, a rusty stapler, a broken cold iron, some old picture frames, and a pair of heavily modified sneakers. Careful. It's fine. Those are just tinderbox, some new fashion trend, said Nicole. They're junk, according to what I read online. Ha. Was the cold iron numbums, maybe? No way. It's old, but only like 30 years old. I've used parts from one with that logo before. Numbum has been dead for, oh gosh, over 100 years ago. 153 years ago according to his wiki page, I supplied. But I'll need to double check that later. Couldn't have a repeat of the zoo ad. Those liars. Wow, what a bunch of junk then, said Mikey. Maybe the numbers were a dud. There weren't any other items with the labeling 347, I answered. I don't think the rooms or displays go up that high. Must be something here. Mikey ruffled through the items, pulling out a few more bus tickets. Flipping through the frames revealed a few pictures of heroes with signatures on them. They were old enough that they might be worth something, but not old enough that they were something Numbum could have owned. It was when Mikey picked up one of the shoes that we found what we were looking for. A roll of coins fell out of it. It's filled with $50, said Mikey, unwrapping the roll. That's Numbum, right? He made money. Yeah. We can check with Murphy before we leave, but this is definitely what her instructions point to, said Cindy. Ha. Seems like a lot of trouble for $25 in change. Mikey shrugged his shoulders and picked a coin out of the roll, holding it up to the light. Looks normal, oh. It says 21.62. Look. He passed the coin to Nicole, who suddenly looked quite interested, and pulled another coin out of the roll. 21.57. He passed it to Cindy and started handing out the coins so we could all look through them. All of the coins were printed using the old AD format, as opposed to the current OS format. Wasn't the timeline format switched to OS in the 21st century? Not the 22nd? I asked. While the internet was suspect, I was pretty sure I would have noticed such a large discrepancy in my research. To my knowledge, the AD format ended with 2018, the year of the first odd summer. It's because of Numbum, said Nicole, excitedly. I've read up on him a bit. He was a tinker from Ireland who the architect hired to do all the tamper-proofing on the city's money. But rumor has it Numbum hated the new OS labeling, and would switch the mint machines back to AD whenever people weren't looking. Because no one could replicate his tamper-proofing, he never got fired for it. They recalled a bunch of them, but he lived a long time, so there were a decent amount floating around out there. And this mislabeling makes these coins special? I asked. Yep. Some people collect them, and Numbum's machines have started to break down, so they've gotten pretty valuable. There's 50 coins here, so that could be a few hundred, or even a few $1,000s or so. I don't know what the individual dates are worth. The wiki mentioned a special AD print of coins in honor of Numbum after his death, but not the information of Numbum's character or his minting eccentricities. Not technically an inaccuracy, but still a lack of information which could result in inaccuracies. Adder had taught me inaccuracy had its place, but that was during combat, and only to introduce an element of randomness to your attack pattern. Who was the wiki trying to attack? Even stranger to me, the money printed with inaccurate information was worth more than its actual numerical value. Humans were just so weird sometimes. Well, we found the Numbum stuff Murphy wanted. What's next on the list? Asked Mikey. Says to be on the lookout for anything labeled 67 or with the word winter, take anything that looks especially valuable or casino-themed, leave a taunting note, and to avoid waffle irons, replied Cindy. Everyone looked at me. I didn't bring any. Aha. Well, then I guess we just finish this up, then. And find the security footage, she added, with a nod to Nicole. We set about looking through the rest of the storage rooms while Nicole tried to track down the security footage. Crate number 67 was filled with papier-mâché superhero masks, apparently made by a local elementary school and awaiting display in the gallery. My friends unanimously decided to leave those where they were. Apparently taking them would have been mean. As for Winter, we found several different references and objects. One was a small piece of costume for a hero named Long Winter. Supposedly it was all that was left of him after he was vaporized. Another was a book, Odd Summer and the Long Winter, a mathematical explanation for the 9-year gap, first edition by Ektos. Its pages were filled with skittering numbers, letters, and patterns that made me feel sick. Error. 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 Close it. Close it, cried Mikey, repeatedly. I've got it, cried Cindy, slamming the book shut. She was holding the book, which was weird, because I had been holding it. Tofu. Tofu, are you okay? Nicole was grabbing me by the shoulders and trying to look into my mask. I'm fine. Did something happen? Tofu, it looked like you were having a seizure. Your arm melted. Oh. She was right. My left arm was mush and leaking out of my suit, and there were multiple points of failure across my entire body. Signal interruption, the micro-unit self-destructed. One such point was in my brain, so I had indeed been having the equivalent of a stroke. I began repairing the damage, Nicole hovering over me and asking questions to confirm my mental state. Cindy and Mikey looked like they had also had some difficulty, as Mikey was retching into a trash can, and Cindy was holding the closed book at arm's length and leaning unsteadily on a nearby crate. Cindy, can you please burn that book? I requested. With pleasure. I can't believe someone just left this thing lying around. Let's take it outside, it'll set off the fire alarms. Cindy's phone rang. She glanced at the number. It's Murphy. 1 second. When she answered her phone, the sound of Murphy yelling not to destroy the book came through loudly. Calm down, Murphy. Stop yelling, I haven't. Well, because it almost killed Tofu. No, he's fine now. No, we're more or less fine. It's not. It's what? Oh. Fine. Fine. Geez. Cindy hung up. Murphy wants the book. After what it did to Tofu. Why? It's part of a set apparently. Written by a guy who tried to predict odd summers. So he was insane is what you're saying. Yeah, but Murphy wants to read it. Says it can be used for other things, and she also said she would give us bad luck if we destroy it. Unbelievable. Cindy shrugged, half-heartedly. Yeah, but that's working with villains for you. Honestly, I've never heard her talk like that to me. Maybe the book is really that important. Look, I'll run it out to her and then we can go when you find the security footage. Tofu, are you feeling better? Yes, I'm fine, but I may need to borrow that trash can, Mikey. I had to expel some waste. Too many micro-units self-destructed. Alright. I'll be back in a bit. Disappointing. I wanted that book destroyed, but I wasn't willing to anger Murphy to do it. The thought that some writing in a book could disable me just by looking at it was stressful, but making an enemy of Murphy would have rather terrible long-term repercussions, especially if I was understanding the full implications of her power. I could perhaps just kill her. I'd have easy access to her on the ride back, and she seemed worn out from using her power. I was pretty sure if I stabbed her brain it would halt her power from working, but she was a friend of Hellion. And Cindy. And my friends would probably react very poorly to me murdering Murphy right in front of them. I liked that my friends were overall non-violent, it was one of the main reasons I was friends with them, but I had to admit it was sometimes a chore to work around the fact. I'd have to set a hard reflex to avoid looking at strange math books, and test the resulting behavior, and formulate excuses in case someone watched me flinch away from a textbook, and set the contingencies so if I did need to look at a strange book it wouldn't cause a hiccup if it was during a fight, and create a better error bypass, and designate adequate paradox buffering, and etc. Sigh. The things I do to avoid murder. Oh well. Man, that book really hit you hard, huh, said Mikey as I finished throwing up. Yes, but I'm fine now. Wonder why it was so bad for you. I just got really nauseous, and it felt like I was failing a math test really hard. Did you feel anything, Nicole? Not really. I couldn't read it, but it was like I couldn't because it was too high level, or in another language maybe. I suspect it's because of the Benedictine reaction phenomenon, I said. I'm the only one of us without Benedictine bacteria. What's that got to do with it? Asked Mikey. Benedictine seems to help with power-based math. Oh, I kinda remember hearing about that. So I guess it was like trying to fly a jet when you're still learning to ride a bike, then. I guess that explains why I threw up. My reaction is pretty low if I remember right. Guess that's why I didn't do so well in math class. High school math is well below the requirement of needing Benedictine, Mikey. Ah, shut it you. He grinned and bapped his fist against my shoulder. Since you're obviously feeling better, let's go find that footage. Finding the security footage amounted to us following Nicole around while she tracked the signals emitted from the wireless security cameras. By the time Cindy got back to us, Nicole had determined that the storage wasn't in the intake building. This one is a dud too, Nicole sighed, closing the metal box bolted to the wall. Excellent wiring, though. Then I guess it's somewhere in the museum proper, said Cindy. We crossed over to the main museum from the intake building through some doors that were cleverly disguised from the gallery side as some kind of, actually, I wasn't sure what this was. Is this a church? It's supposed to be a temple. Egyptian maybe? Oh, Mesopotamian. The sign is over there. Mikey pointed to a plaque. It described the temple room as a recreation based on one of the oldest known to humanity, as identified by retrocognitionist Abdul Ajax. While the creation of the glass desert resulted in the destruction of countless thousands of such sites, retrocognitionists and archaeologists have managed to recreate many of them to near pristine conditions for your viewing pleasure. Sponsored by New Dawn Incorporated. Ha! New Dawn Incorporated. Interesting. We exited the temple and emerged into an area of the museum that seemed dedicated to human history. Primitive history. There were pots, musical instruments, and tools from all over the world, all labeled as replicas and all from the Iron Age at the earliest. Nothing even close to humanity's current technological level. Interestingly, there were even masks, although none were labeled with the name of the person who had worn them, only the factions, or tribes as humans called them, that made and used them. Apparently masks used to be communal before the beginning of Odd Summer. At least, it did not appear that their heroes wore them often. All depictions of individuals like Hercules, or King Arthur didn't have them, at least. The ones who looked like they might be wearing a mask, like Wukong or Anubis, instead turned out to be mutants. Or gods. I wasn't sure what the distinction between a god like Zeus and a super like the Guardian was. Zeus could shapeshift and throw lightning, but the Guardian could fly and block fireballs with his bare hands. There was no real difference beyond one's a super and the other isn't. Trying to understand how humans separated the two was confusing at best. I needed help beyond the unreliable internet. Luckily, I could ask my friends. Okay, so basically, explained Cindy, every superpower you hear about before the first Odd Summer, back in 2018, is completely made up. All of them? Yep. Like, don't get me wrong, there were probably people who were pretty amazing, but at best it was exaggerated big time. There isn't a single recorded instance of superpowers before Odd Summer that can be verified with evidence. What about supers like the Avengers, or Batman. Completely made up. Before Odd Summer it was all stories. Think of it like this, the stories aren't based on real superheroes modeled themselves off of those stories. Oh. So people like Hercules and Jesus didn't actually exist. That last one. I mean, some of them might have been real people. So was Anubis a real person? And Santa Claus? Chuck Norris? Sarah Connor? What about the Easter Bunny? I mean, I doubt they were all fake. Is this why I haven't seen any churches or temples? Those gods are all made up. Whoa, hold up. That is to say, I'm not an expert on this kinda stuff. I don't know about all those people, Tofu, but there are some churches and mosques and stuff over in W10. It was the designated culture district back in the day. There just aren't any in E13. Overlord was a my way or the highway kinda guy, and he didn't have much patience for non-critical infrastructure. E13 never really picked up religion after his death, unless you count the Waller cult, and nobody does. I see. Isn't knowing which of these people is real important, though? Isn't it dangerous to not verify these things? Oh. Is that what's been bothering you? Asked Mikey. Dude, you're not gonna get jumped by Anubis, or Santa Claus or whatever. Not unless some yahoo dressed like them is doing it. It's not worth worrying about ghosts and goblins of Christmas past when there's real supervillains around. You'll worry yourself silly. But, you said that your grandma would hit me if I didn't bring food. That caused all three of my friends to pause, and the girls turned incredulous looks to Mikey. What now? From beyond the grave. You said she'd hit people who don't bring food when visiting. Lots of mythological beings have such rules. Oh, Jesus. He slapped his forehead. Dude, I promise, my grandma will never, ever hit you. Really? Really? You don't have to follow any mythological rules. If we did, half this city would be smote, and the other half would be smote even harder. Okay, then I have a follow-up question. Shoot. Can I steal some of these obsidian knives? They had a set of 5 in a case which the plaque claimed were exact replicas of sacrificial daggers used in the worship of a South American Loa. Go for it. Nicole disarmed the case alarm for me, which was nice of her considering she didn't really approve of stealing. Cindy told me more history about Lowe's, and with Mikey's assurance, I could enjoy my new knives without worrying that I wasn't a priest of the deity they were intended for. My friends are great. Well worth the effort of avoiding murder.